we expect to be in the final. Denis is a little bit of a surprise, but not the way he's been playing. The way he's been playing in the tournament, it's no surprise at all that he made the final.
And we're about to get lift off as Magnus thinks for a little bit. Don't think too long. Don't keep us guessing. And he opens up with a queen's pawn. Denis there. He's a very classical player. He's going to develop his knight and stake that claim into the center. And we have an opening, which is the queen's gambit. Whether it's going to be declined, whether it's going to be accepted, well, we have an answer. The bishop comes out, sets up a pin, and dynamic is at play from Denis, because this is the most aggressive response. Now here, plenty of options for white. You can come out with your bishop, set up your own pin. You can also take the pawn in the middle. You can also throw in a check with the queen. He goes for that pin and gets immediately questioned.
It's funny, bishop b4 is probably the most common move in that position on move 4, but we haven't seen it a lot this event. Queen a4 check, forking the king and bishop, forcing black to block their c-pawn with knight c6. This is a pretty common line. Black has the 2 bishops, but black's bishop on c8, as per usual, in the queen pawn openings, isn't very active. Magnus, as per usual, going for the safe, solid advantage and try to outplay his opponent slowly in the positional part of the game. And typically, the younger player, in this case, obviously, Lazavik, wants to play more tactically and more aggressively. Magnus is going to avoid that by playing safe, solid, and sound and try to get a small advantage.
But that's exactly what Denis does himself. He likes to take those positions which are super calm, super solid, doesn't take too much risk, and relies on his speed in the later stages of the game. And we're seeing here a nice decision from Magnus, just delaying capturing that pawn with a bishop, and again asking the question to Denis, what are you going to do next? I'm expecting Denis to look after the dark squared bishop and eventually break out in the center to liberate his own light squared bishop that needs to get out.
Queen e7, a little bit of an unusual retreat. And typically in these openings, if black can't get the move c5 in, black tries to play e5. And I'm wondering if Denis is going to retreat his bishop, keep the 2 bishops. Oh, he plays knight a5, attacking the bishop on c4. That explains why Denis played queen e7 earlier, defending the bishop on b4. And I was wrong as usual. Instead of playing e5, it seems like black is going to play for c5. That's why he moved his knight away from the c6 square. So we're seeing some to and fro. Magnus has to do something about his bishop. Seems a little bit perplexed. Moves it back to safety to e2. White has a tiny advantage because white has a nicer center, but black has the 2 bishops. Well, he had the 2 bishops. Now he's trading. He'll play b6 to fianchetto his bishop on b7 and try to equalize the game that way. I still like white a little bit, Yovi, because white has more center pawns than black.
Yeah, exactly. And gotta say, this is a really nice idea from Denis. It's been played before, so he's just simply repeating what he knows. And that bishop is going to get liberated onto its beautiful light squared diagonal. Now, if he can achieve that, then everything is going to be hunky-dory. But if he doesn't do that, if he doesn't manage to put any pressure, then we can see that Magnus is simply going to be equal. So here I'm expecting Magnus to jump in with his knight and start to ask those questions.
Yeah, this looks like, again, Magnus has a slight advantage. Got the knight in the center. He's trading off the bishop on...
Yeah, he's going to trade off the bishops. As soon as that's going to appear, there's going to be a jump in with the knight to the center. And now here, you can't let that beautiful bishop still exist on the board. So this is why you initiate a trade. And white is going to argue, it's a matter of a small margin. He's going to say, well, okay, this is all moot, Ben, because the players have not gone for this. There's been no jump into the center.
No.
Instead, Magnus is just taking his own path, and we're going to be seeing an exchange of queens. But Denis there just saying, hang on a second, if that trade is going to happen, it's going to be on my own terms.
Exactly. There's really to and fro here. White trying to get the smallest of advantages. The engines really like the way the players are playing. White, Magnus trying to get a small advantage, trying to get those better center pawns. Black trying to develop the bishop, then play c5 at some point, putting pressure on white center. Very equalish kind of position. I think Magnus is happy with the kind of structure they have where he can try to slowly outplay his opponent. Typical Magnus play. Denis has a really solid position. Both players are playing pretty quickly. Not many tactics in the position, just a slow build-up, Yovi.
It is a slow build-up, I'm going to say, but it's actually going to be easier to play black here because now the rooks are going to just align into the center, and the pawn break that you mentioned is just to attack the queen, break open with the c-pawn, and then black is going to stand really well. So this is why Magnus saying, I don't like that light squared bishop, let's make the trade.
Yeah, Magnus going to play bishop f3 at some point, trading the bishops. The knight can head out to c4 or b3, get rid of the knight on a5. And eventually, Magnus wants to push one or both of those center pawns by playing c4 or e4. Probably not both. That would weaken the d4 pawn. And as you said, black wants to play c5 at some point. He just has to time it right because some of the queenside pieces could be a bit loose. So he plays rook a c8, preparing to play c5 later. Magnus has to make sure Denis can't play c5 and equalize the position. Plays knight b3. He wants to recapture with the a pawn, getting rid of his isolated pawn. And he's threatening right now to take that knight on a5, especially since the b pawn is pinned. And he's defending the c5 square. So very logical play from both sides. Not the most exciting position. I think Magnus and Denis like that. They like to slowly outmaneuver their opponents and gain small incremental advantages and not play for big tactics right away.
Exactly. I mean, both of them are fighting with the same sword to effect. So we're seeing Denis just attack the queen. Super good. Keeping the tension still alive in the position. And now the queen just has to move. Now, big question on the board. Going to make the trade. And Magnus answers with the affirmative. Yes. And now, in turn, very quick response. You could have taken with a rook.
Yeah.
But take with a pawn and just release the rook. And what a position so far. It's going to be a famous Magnus grind as he tries to lock out the bishop, take perhaps a big center, and Denis is going to have to fight against those small margins.
Yeah, both sides are going to move their kings to the center. King f2, black plays king f8 to e7. Magnus is going to push his pawns. The question is Magnus going to play e4 and have a bigger pawn center? Black's putting a lot of pressure on the C line. Black is considering playing d5 or b5 at some point. Here comes the king. I think Lazavik's king is going to move to the queen side also with king f8 to e7. I think it's about equal. Both sides try to outplay each other, test the pieces out the first game, but pretty equal so far, Yovi.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty even, but I gotta say that there are two rooks bearing down against white's one. So immediately there could be some challenges to that pawn in the middle, but instead some gentle improvement. And how Magnus, being crafty, he's like, you know what? I'm gonna set up the idea of breaking up the left side of the board by lifting up my own pawn, making a challenge. And this is very clever stuff.
Yeah, Magnus is considering playing b4, putting more pressure on the queen side. And as you pointed out, Yovi, black had the double rooks on the C line, bearing down on Magnus's rook on c1. He just moved it off the file. And now Lazavik realizes that Magnus was considering playing b4, puts pressure on the c4 pawn. It's a to and fro game. It's not easy to do anything. Lazavik does move the king to e7, which I indicated would happen. The question is, can Magnus get more space and play e4, king e3? Or is he going to be okay just maneuvering around in his own lines and accepting equality? The engine likes white a little bit. I think it's equal. We're going to see if Magnus can improve the position on the board. Well, he does play e4.
He does go for your plan of just slowly making those improvements. Now the king is getting ready to go into the middle of the board. And you've got to watch out because this is the moment where Magnus creates those magical moments. Look at that. You know, how is black going to challenge that pawn wedge in the middle of the board? How is black going to break through and just liberate the pieces? It's not very easy at all.
No, it's not clear. Black has 3 pawn breaks, d5, b5, and e5. The question is, does he want to do any of those or simply wait for Magnus to do something of his own accord? And both players have about 5 minutes left. The time is about the same. Yeah. Again, black has all these possible pawn breaks, but black could just wait too and not do anything and say, Magnus, you can't do anything. I'm happy to just wait here and see if white can try to do one of their pawn breaks of their own. Obviously, Magnus is going to play king e3 pretty soon and then try to move the pawns in the center. there's not really many places to go. Black is so solid, Yovi.
It is definitely very solid for black, but at the same time, it's not easy to play with less space. And you know, us humans, we want to be bursting out into the position. So I'm actually expecting Denis to blink first and maybe challenge in the center immediately with the move d5. And once he gets that, then suddenly the whole position changes.
Yeah, that's right. It looks simple now. Once a pawn break is made, players have to think a while. And he played the other pawn break, Yovi, e5. Magnus moved his king up into the center as expected, king e3. White has an advantage. White has more space in the center. Denis is just chilling, waiting for Magnus to do something. And I think from Magnus's point of view, probably playing something like f4 at some point. And Denis blinks. This actually surprises me that he gave up his e-pawn on e5. That was such a strong pawn. Now Denis is saddled with the weak, isolated d-pawn on the half-open line. So now I think actually Magnus could have a serious advantage if he can put pressure on the d6 pawn.
And that's exactly what he's going to do. And he's going to make those small improvements first. So first up, take the space as he's just done. And then he can keep his opponent guessing. You know, maybe he's going to put his rook double up, start pointing at that lone pawn. Maybe he's going to be also breaking out on the left side of the pawn. These are so many things. There's so many things that Denis has to be considering. And it's not easy to sit there and wait for your opponent to strike.
No, Magnus doubles rooks, as you suggested, putting pressure on the d6 pawn. And the question for me is, now that Lazavik has played e5 and captured on d4, is he going to play b5 and put pressure on that c4 pawn? Or is Denis going to be happy to wait and say, you can't do anything, I'm really solid here, this position is just equal? And so far, looks like Denis is doing a good job of equalizing the game and making it difficult for Magnus to break through anywhere.
It's equal, but it's not quite equal because Magnus is the only one that is trying. And already he's setting up a sneaky idea. You see, he had eyes against that bishop. That's why the bishop dropped back, just to prevent White from breaking open the left side of the board. And still the thing is, White is the only one that is slowly improving, whereas for Black, it's not easy to break out. So Black is more or less in wait and see mode.
Yeah, usually it's not a good tactic against Magnus to have a passive wait and see kind of position and be slightly worse, which is what Black has chosen this game. White has more space with all of Magnus's pawns on the fourth rank. Lazavik only has one pawn on the fourth rank. So White has more space. White's king is a little further up the board. White has more options to do things. White has more time on the clock. Advantage Magnus, just a small advantage, but that's all Magnus needs to get victory usually, Ovi.
Exactly, and I gotta say, you know, it's now really tempting to make perfect geometry on the board, advance the other pawn and get 4 pawns on the same line, but no, we have more waiting from Magnus. Moves with the bishop and the king, starts making some way towards the left. Maybe there's some ideas of eventually breaking open. These are the things that are keeping Denis guessing. And you know what? It's costing him some time now, under 3 minutes on the clock. And there's no way that Magnus is going to be repeating this position 3 times.
No, Magnus is trying to figure out a way to play b4, either by playing king c3 first or playing rook b1, opening up the lines for the rook. Right now, they're just moving back and forth, not doing very much. Magnus can't seem to find a good plan. Looks like Magnus wants to put his king on d4 instead of his rook. Then he can move his other rook to the b line, and that's what he does. Try to play b4. Magnus's king on the 4th row, Lazavik on the 2nd row. Lazavik just moving back and forth. He's saying, I have a perfect position. You can't break through. There's nothing you can do. And Magnus says, just watch me work.
Exactly. And this is the Grinder's Manual 101. What do? You just keep your opponent guessing. You keep things flexible. You don't make a pawn move. And you only do it when your opponent is down on the clock and they can't assess the consequences. So this game is going to go for a long, long time. We're already on move 43. I'm expecting it to last until move 80. And some more shuffling going on from our players as the rook lines up. And, you know, again, Denis is going to have to guess at every single turn. You know, when is that pawn going to advance? When am I going to have some action?
Magnus trying to play b4, but Lazavik attacking that c4 pawn, making it very difficult. Magnus trying all he can, everything he can to defend that c pawn. so he can play b4 and break through. Seems like b4 is his only breakthrough, but Magnus can't seem to figure out a way to get it in. Lazavik defending against the b4 breakthrough by putting all of his pieces on white's c4 pawn. White's c4 pawn defended really well by the pawn on b3. But we've seen some repetitions. Magnus better be careful and not accidentally repeat 3 times. Then he'll be pretty upset. Magnus has a time advantage. He has a space advantage. But Lazavik is solid this game.
He's very solid, so it's going to be a question of when Magnus is going to break through. When is he going to make his move? I mean, at the minute, he's been maneuvering with the rook. I'm expecting him to drop his bishop one more time, and maybe, just maybe, we're going to be seeing some inroads happen. Oh, okay, I spoke too soon, because here it comes. Here is the action. He is breaking through. Now, big question, how is Black going to be handling this? Is he just going to drop his rook back, attack the white rook, or can he play anything else? Because one thing for sure, you do not want to be capturing that pawn, because if you do that, the 2 rooks are going to be lined up perfectly.
That's right. Black doesn't want to take on b4. Lazavik is probably considering rook takes c4 check with an attack on the rook on a4. Be a lot of trading then. He decided not to do it. Instead, he discovered attacks the rook. Now Magnus safely got in b4. Magnus is attacking the a and b pawns. Magnus's advantage on the clock is growing. It's almost 1 minute. And it looks like Magnus's position is improving. Now Black has 2 weak pawns, the pawn on b6, the pawn on d6. Magnus is going to go to work. Slowly but surely, Magnus is inching his way in, attacking those weak pawns.
Yeah, and this is a thing of beauty as we see him again, just shuffling, but now he starts maximizing the position. He's got full control here as Denis ticks down to under 1 minute and a half. And the only thing Denis can do now is wait. And it's really interesting to see in the lead up to all of this, he set some tactical questions to Denis and said, hey, how about you make some trades and then I can start to infiltrate. And look at this, the king steps back. Magnus, ever so patient. He's in his element here.
Right, Magnus puts the bishop on f3, and he's putting pressure on the rook on b7. White could play e5, discover, attack the rook. Right now, the pawn on c4 is under attack. Magnus defends it. So Black attacks the c4 pawn. Magnus attacks the b6 pawn. Now Magnus is going to trade rooks and try to get his king to go to the b5 square and attack the b pawn that way. Slowly but surely, Magnus is inching his way into the queen side. Magnus has a time advantage. So far, it looks like a typical Magnus game, taking a slight advantage, making it a clear advantage, and eventually breaking through on one side or the other.
But hats off to Denis, who is resolutely holding on. He is holding the door, making sure everything is closed. And it's ugly chess. It's really unpleasant to play, but he is still doing it. Look at this, now under the minute, and here he comes. He's breaking out. Is this enough to equalize as the bishops come off the board? Check. And I think Denis is doing it.
Yeah, Magnus seemed pretty unhappy when Denis played b5. I think he misunderstood that. And now Black has pretty much equalized the game. Magnus still has a better king, but the pawns are coming off the board. They're all on the same side. Magnus threatens checkmate with his king. All the pawns are going to come off. It looks like Denis equalized the game just at the right time with b5, and he's probably going to hold the draw.
Yeah, some nice moves there, especially with the king running to the right, making sure it's getting shelter. And Magnus just offering up some trades, is not happy with himself because usually he wins those types of endgames, but Denis showing him that he's also a good positional player here, and now it's going to be very difficult for Magnus to start improving the pawns, but he goes for it. Now comes
Magnus has a passed pawn, but and he blunders into the lost king and pawn ending. Blundering in time trouble, now White's winning.
Oh my goodness.
Both players shaking their heads, Magnus realizing how lucky he was. Denis overlooked rook f5 check, getting into a winning king and pawn endgame.
And this is the problem. This would be stalemate, except there is a pawn that Denis can move, and Magnus wins the game. Right when it looked like it was heading to a draw, Denis makes a big blunder.
Just as it looked like Denis solved all his problems, made a blunder with very little time on the clock, and ended up losing the game. Magnus obviously very happy about the turn of events. Really nice, solid defensive game from Lazavik until the very end. And boy, it's easy to blunder when you have less than a minute, Yovi. I do it all the time.
It's super easy to do, especially when you've been holding on for such a long time. And Magnus there with a lot of support. And indeed, he does make his crowd proud. Now, gotta say, though, for Magnus, he's going to be feeling really happy because he won that game. But Denis, will he be tilted by that kind of a blunder? Because it's very painful to lose in that manner.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. He defended so well for so long. And as soon as everything looked like it was all set and he was ready to draw the game, a one-move blunder going into the lost king and pawn ending, Magnus wins. Magnus probably surprises anybody. He won that rook and pawn ending. That's typical Magnus, winning drawn endings, winning positions nobody else can win. And we've seen it before. We'll see it again. Denis has to equalize right away. Denis has white. He's going to want to win the game. And they play the same opening as last time, except now Denis is white. Magnus plays h6 instead of bishop b4. So we have another variation this time, Yovi.
Exactly, and this is somewhat of a Magnus specialty. He likes to play this pawn move. It's just to eliminate certain lines. He also likes to do it on the other side of the board as well. But the big question now for white is, what are you going to do? And Denis opts for his trusted fianchetto variation. That's something that Denis does very regularly. He just goes for positions with small pool, but not that much risk.
Yeah, it looks like a Catalan variation where Magnus has played an early h6. So still both players are in their preparation. White has a slight advantage. Magnus takes the pawn on c4. Typically, white wins the pawn back relatively quickly with knight e5 or queen a4. And Magnus will start attacking the center with c5. Sometimes the bishop fights the other bishop, goes to the diagonal.
Yeah, absolutely.
With bishop d7 to c6 or b6, bishop b7.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities that white has, but most of them center around the fact that this light square bishop is so good. As we see, the knight does jump in. Very quick reaction there from Magnus. And now here, the whole idea is that, yes, you are returning the pawn, but you are maintaining that stronghold on c4. So here we're expecting this. And now I think the best move in this type of position is you can come out with your queen, but you can also grab that pawn, and triple pawns. We often call them drunken pawns. 3 pawns in a row.
I like to say triple pawns are 3 times as good, but usually I'm kidding. Nobody wants to have triple pawns. But black is ahead of pawn until white takes one of those pawns back. As you pointed out, Yovi, Denis does play queen a4, putting pressure on the weak c pawns that black has. Magnus, by taking on c4 and c6, can get his bishop out and maybe trade the white squared bishops. Black has the solid d5 square for his knight. White is slightly better, but Magnus feels like if he equalizes the game, he could then play for an advantage with black.
Yeah, and this is a full-on gambit, though, because black can pick up that queen and take that pawn in the middle. And there's going to be some questions there on how to actually get compensation for that. Magnus currently thinking as to what to do. He has many options. He can just sidestep with his rook, get out of the potential firing line. He can also develop the light squared bishop. But big decision. Do you go into this theoretical battle, take the pawn? Or do you try to drift into unfamiliar
We're
waters?
both pawn grabbers, right, Yovi? So we take the pawn on d4 because we like taking pawns.
Yeah, we're both pawn grabbers, so we do like this concept of grabbing the pawn with the queen, whereupon the queen will be chased around the board. But nonetheless, we will be very satisfied because we have that extra pawn in our pocket. So that's the main move. We will see whether Magnus plays it. He seems pretty chill at the minute. And Magnus knows a lot, though. He goes for the second alternative, which is just a sidestep with the rook. And there, white does have 4 pawns you can snack on.
Yeah, both c-pawns are under attack. The a-pawn's under attack. Magnus puts his rook on the open line so that if white ever moves the bishop on c1, the b2 pawn will be weak. So very double-edged position. Black is still a pawn ahead. Pawn structure is not very good for black. Very double-edged position, which I'm sure Denis likes. Denis has to get off the back foot, doesn't want to draw games and lose the match. He wants to win and equalize the match. These matches are 2 sets of 4 games each. You don't have a lot of time once you lose a game. Denis needs to win this game and get back to an equal match.
Yeah, and a lot of people would be like, well, hang on a second, there's 4 pawns up for grabs. Which one of those should white be taking? And most people have actually taken the A pawn, attack the rook, and then black is going, well, let me try and trap the queen. So it gets a little bit complicated. If Denis wants to be super fancy, he can actually move his rook towards the middle and defend his own pawn. And his big idea is that, hey, black is material up. But let's face it, you're not going to be writing too many
that's not the extra
nice things about that
have.
one.
No,
Exactly.
that's right.
I mean, look at them. They're awful.
Yeah, terrible pawn structure for Magnus. But Magnus activated his rook on the B line. Magnus is still a pawn ahead. Magnus can still attack the center with C5. His position is not much worse by any means. Still, white has that Catalan advantage with that nice bishop on G2, on the nice diagonal. Better than Magnus's bishop on C8. So Denis can still try for an advantage. And it seems like Magnus seems to know the opening ins and outs better than Denis this time. Denis taking a lot of time in the opening. We're pretty early in the game, move 10, and already Denis has taken 4 minutes on his clock. That's a lot of time for the first 10 moves of the game.
Yeah, and actually, I think you're right. We're going to be seeing Magnus here in his preparation because this is predictable. Denis does like his Catalan formation. He loves putting this bishop on this long diagonal. So I think this would have come as no surprise to him. So we will see. What is white going to do? I mean, one of black's ideas is actually to lift up his rook 2 squares and just cement his pawns together. But Denis has to make a move. I mean, he can't afford to let himself go so much down on time.
No, Denis has a much higher heart rate too than Magnus, which isn't surprising. Magnus has been there, done that, won this tournament last year, got to win this tournament this year. This is Denis's first time. Denis's heart rate getting a little high. He's thinking a long time in the early middle game, not sure what to do, a little unsure of himself. Advantage world champion, advantage Magnus, champion of so many formats. And he plays an unusual move. Bishop takes C6. The engine doesn't like it. Seems like Denis is out of his prep. And now Magnus can seize an initiative by playing an aggressive move, taking that pawn on D4. Not only does it take a pawn, but it defends the pawns on A7 and C4. So I think Magnus is going to take on D4, still have an extra pawn, and Denis has to show what his compensation is.
Yeah, it's certainly the most tempting moves, especially for those of us who like the extra material. Grab that pawn in the middle, and then you can use your queen to cement those weaknesses. Because I gotta say, black's big pawn there on the C4 square is a big asset to the position. It's just locking down its counterpart there on B2, and the black rook is mobile. Now, big question is, will Magnus take up the gauntlet? Will he grab that pawn? He doesn't need to. He can also trade off bishops. That's also good enough. But will Magnus take it?
I think Magnus is going to take on D4, hang on to his extra pawn, put the onus on white to figure out how to get compensation. Magnus is thinking a while, too. He's obviously not familiar with bishop takes C6, which doesn't have high marks. Magnus does take on D4. And it seems like in this game, opening battle won by Magnus. He has the black pieces, and he's already fighting for an advantage, Jovi.
Yeah, I'm glad that Magnus made his move because I was going to take a bet with you. I was going to say that he challenges the bishop, but I would have lost that one, and the queen does come out to the middle. And now here you have to use the time, the lead in development. So Denis has to now go on the front foot. He has to start chasing away that queen and then somehow or other generate compensation. And it's not going to be easy because how do you do this? Okay, out with the queen. Queen has to step back, preferably in the middle of the board. Queens want to be centralized. That way they can point every single direction.
And you were right, Jovi. He played queen E5. So it's funny. Bishop E3 attacks the A7 pawn, but bishop E3 also undefends the pawn on B2. So Magnus, even though it's a double pawn, is still a pawn ahead. The pawn is attacked on B2, C4, A7. And it looks like Denis maybe going for repetition with the bishop moves. Well, the C7 pawn is hanging also. So lots of queens getting attacked from Magnus. The queen goes to C5. Will Denis keep trying to repeat and play bishop E3, which he did, or will he try to take one of the pawns? And the question is, can Magnus play for a win?
Oh, well,
and he does.
He does. Because look at that. That queen is now staring at the white king. This is going to be backed up if white is careless with the knight jumping in to the G4 square. And there's going to be some attacks against the bishop and the pawn. Whoa, this is getting exciting already, because how do you handle that? I mean, you can't instinctively fight it.
No, black wants to play knight G4, threatening queen H2 mate. Magnus playing for the attack on the king's side. Magnus also has open line on the queen side with his rook on B8, bearing down on the pawn on B2. Lots of initiative for Magnus. The engine says white is okay, but black has lots of threats. Queen takes H2 mate, rook takes B2, black is already a pawn ahead, and Denis says, I'm going to attack your queen every move. Stop attacking me with your queen, and the bishop attacks the queen on H5. And we have another possible repetition with queen H3, bishop G2, queen H5, because the queen keeps getting attacked. Magnus doesn't have a ton of squares for his queen. He only has a couple of options.
He also can block that attack by going on the front foot himself. He can jump in with his knight, and there we're going to be seeing a different type of position where that bishop is going to be forced to trade itself off. And I got to still say, it's now an open position, and those bishops are going to be deadly.
Yeah, Magnus will be really happy to trade off Denis's Catalan bishop, the white squared bishop. And then Magnus has his own white squared bishop, which he can fianchetto and put pressure on Denis's king. So I wouldn't be surprised if Magnus plays knight G4, threatening the mate in 1. But he also could move his queen to a safe square. And it seems like the pressure's on Denis this game. He has much less time on the clock. Black has all the initiative. Black's a pawn ahead. Oh, I don't like the move H4. Put it in H. The engine doesn't like it either. As a grandmaster, I don't like it more. I'd be way too afraid to play H4. That's too scary. But it was even scarier for Lazavik to get rid of the two bishops.
Well, that was a quick response there from Magnus, because actually that wasn't the best move. As we can see, it was actually better to challenge that light square bishop. And now Denis getting greedy, and suddenly it's still really finely tuned, because white is threatening to drop back with the queen to the center, and there is a pin in town.
That knight is pinned, perpetual pin. Yeah, Magnus played rook takes b2 pretty quickly, Yovi, and the engine doesn't like it. So the engine thinks the players are nervous. Magnus has a pretty good heart rate, 85. Don't tell Arjun that. Magnus has more time on the clock. Still, Magnus is a pawn ahead, but his pawns on c7 and c4 can be captured soon. Knight on g4 is under attack. Magnus playing on both sides of the board. Queen h5, knight g4 on the king side, rook on b2 on the queen side. And we have a very complicated position where when both sides get down to a minute or two, we're going to see heads roll.
We're going to see heads roll. I mean, that will be certainly something to witness. And Magnus just thinking, maybe he can take advantage of the fact that that white queen is out there wandering on the wrong side of the board. If he can't find a response, then it's going to be all about unpinning himself. But it's so tempting, right? To go on the front foot, to go aggressive, especially whilst the white queen is on walkies.
Yeah, as you pointed out, Magnus should have challenged the bishop on f3 by playing bishop e7, and that's why Denis took on a7, stopping black from playing bishop b7. The queen attacks c7. Both queens are on the side of the board, infiltrating their opponent's position. Magnus just had a really long think and decided to unpin his knight, threatening to get the two bishops. Black doesn't have a mating attack anymore. Black is trying to get the two bishops. But still, Magnus is a pawn ahead. It's a doubled pawn, but Denis isn't going to want to be a pawn down for much longer. So it's possible he plays bishop d4, doesn't want to give up his bishops. So a very to and fro game where pieces are getting attacked and moving out of the way. The queens are getting attacked. The queens are going to the opposite side of the board. Very double-edged position. Both sides have 3 minutes. Anything can happen. Magnus doesn't look as happy as he used to look. Denis looking more solid. Things are turning around, and I think Denis's position is okay now.
And you know what? I reckon Magnus is now calculating with the queen offside. Okay, there was the possibility of actually sacrificing the bishop. That would have been super complicated, but Magnus goes for the positional response, the minimum risk. And now he starts improving his pieces, and maybe he's going to try and take it to an in-game again.
Yeah, black should be better than ending with the extra pawn, with the passed pawn on c4, the rook on b2. Denis does a discovered attack on the rook on b2 by playing knight c3. Denis also wants to take that bishop on f6 with his knight and get the two bishops. Very complicated move. All the pieces are hanging now. They're all in the center. They can all be captured. This, typically in a slow game, classical game, the players would be thinking a long time, but they don't have that luxury. They have to play quickly. And as you pointed out, Magnus is trading pieces going into the pawn-up endgame. We'll see if Denis wants to go into the endgame, or instead he takes on c4 and equalizes material.
Yeah. And it's no prizes for guessing which one I would personally go for. It would be just take that pawn, restore material balance, and then go into an endgame. Because absolutely, if the queens get traded off and the c-pawn has disappeared, I would say that actually white is that little bit better. But as it stands, you got to do the job in hand. And Denis just thinking, he must not let himself get too far down on the clock. That's when blunders happen, because time trouble makes fools of us all.
And that's actually happened in the first game. Denis got very little time on the clock, blundered in a drawn ending. He did take the pawn. Finally, Magnus developed his queen bishop, which has been on c8 the whole game. Black's pieces are super active. Material is equal. The engine says it's about equal. The only difference is Magnus has a minute more on the clock. Is Denis going to get in time trouble again and make a mistake? Or can he hold on and draw this game? It's a 2-result game just because of the time situation. You don't want to be a minute behind against Magnus on the clock. But unfortunately, that's what's happened the first 2 games.
No, you don't want to be too slow against Magnus. He's shown how he is ruthless. And I got to say, love Magnus's last move. That bishop developing, also targeting the knight, so that if there is bishop takes knight from white, well, then black can also do the same. And this is the big question for Denis. He does take that knight, and now bishop is going to recapture. So Magnus saying that white's king is a little bit more unsafe, and there we see another trade. But I got to say, in terms of pawn structure, because pawns are the soul of the game, I got to say white's is the one that is a little bit shaky, because that lone pawn is not far advanced, and it is problems with the king. Be careful.
Last move, black was threatening queen takes g3 check with a brilliant checkmate. Instead, they traded to a drawn ending. The players are going to repeat and agree to a draw soon. Magnus doesn't have any winning chances, really. White should have plenty of time with 53 seconds. They're just trading pawns. Everything's the same. And Denis, I think, did that on purpose, wanted to trade everything because of the time situation wasn't looking good.
No. And there's some nice moves there from Denis as he just maneuvers his knight. And the big question is, how much effort is Magnus going to be putting into prolonging this game? I don't think...
he looks disgusted, like he just wants to draw already.
Because he had the advantage, and now with the trade of rooks, it is 3 pawns versus 3, and this one is as drawn as can be. The rooks just shuffling, and maybe the players are going to repeat 3 times. Still not finding. Is Magnus trying to play this one out on the clock? Still more maneuvers. Agree a draw, guys.
We're analysts, but we have nothing to analyze. They just move their rook back and forth until either 50 move rule or 3-time repetition.
Well, okay, Magnus saying, watch out of the clock. You know, you got to be careful, because I am prepared to grind this one out. I'm prepared to use the clock as a power. And now are we going to see more shuffling? Okay, a draw by repetition.
He was trying to win. He played e5 to get rid of the 50 move rule, but then he repeated by accident.
That was cheeky.
Yeah.
But it is part of the game as we see the second game finish in a draw. Still 2 games remaining in this match, and Denis Lazavik is still playing catch up.
Yeah, that game looked like Magnus, I thought, had the better chances throughout the game, had more time on the clock. Denis eventually decided to trade everything to make sure that he wouldn't get into bad time trouble and lose. Looks like the players are going to take a little break. Or is Magnus going to walk off and never come? No, that's not going to happen. We can't have that happen every match.
No, the players getting a break. But, you know, Ben, talk us through first game, Magnus with the white pieces. It did look like Denis was never really in trouble, but he was on the passive. He would have been feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah, Denis had like a slight disadvantage in the first game. Nothing too serious. He had a slight time disadvantage, and adding both of those things up went to a full point to Magnus when Denis blundered in time trouble. Denis wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. He got in a worse time situation this game as well. The position was equal. And even though Magnus tried at the end, he accidentally repeated, was a little upset with himself. And a draw was the fair result, though. So far, 2 pretty solid games. 1 blunder from Denis in the first game. Magnus has the advantage in the match. And in the first set of games, we could actually have a winner of the first set. If Magnus wins game 3, it's best of 4 games.
It is best of 4, and I gotta say, I'm loving the crowd. I'm also loving everyone's signs. Look at that. Go. A lot of supporters for Magnus. Go Magnus. That's what I'm seeing. Any fans for Denis? Give us a cheer.
I like one of the signs. It says, go Ali Reza. Ali Reza's crossed out. And it says Magnus. So
very nice.
that's why pencils have erasers. So we can change who we root for.
Yes.
What about go Yovi and go Ben? Where are those signs at? Come on, people.
Yeah. Maybe next time. Maybe next time, Ben. But, you know, when it comes to the second game, I'm going to say that I felt like Magnus had a serious advantage there. And that's something that I think in this break, Denis is going to have to go back to the drawing board and just think about how he's going to respond to this particular opening try by Magnus, because he did not get a good position.
No, White got nothing out of that opening. It was a Catalan-type position. Magnus seemed to understand the ins and outs a little bit better, was the one fighting for the initiative, and eventually seemed like Denis was pretty happy to draw.
Yeah, high five time there from Magnus as he makes that beautiful entrance into the playing arena. Well, it's not every day you go and play a chess match to the sound of the drums. And this is what is at stake, $250,000 championship trophy. And as the king comes in, I mean, this is, I thought, could potentially be a heartbreaking moment for Denis, because right in this moment he makes a really elementary blunder, goes into a lost king and pawn endgame, and that was it. But he recovered.
Yeah, he didn't continue his losing ways. He steadily drew the second game. He's got to draw or win the third game to keep the match going. Magnus tried to win on time, but there was just too little material in the position. That's funny, they got Rook and 4 versus Rook and 4 in both games so far. Both games got to a Rook and pawn ending. Magnus was able to take advantage. Time trouble blunder in game 1, no blunders in game 2, repetition, a fair result. And I think the score of the match is pretty fair based on the way the games have gone so far, Yovi. I think 1.5-1/2, that's probably what it should be right now. Yeah,
but on the other hand, you know, maybe Denis should really have gotten 2 draws. But as it stands, he is trailing by 1 point, so he does have to play catch up as we see Denis Lazavik walk into the room and getting ready for game 3 of match 1. Remember that the final is a best of 3 matches. Oh. Even playing in such a star-studded auditorium, I mean, the players still have to go through the
I saw players
checks.
getting wanded before. I used to live in St. Louis and work at the St. Louis Chess Club. I've seen a lot of wanding in my life, Yovi. There's a lot of wanding, making sure there's fair play. Nobody's playing unfairly. Obviously, in this event, nobody would do such a thing. And the best players in the world, they're playing for huge amounts of prize money, so we have to make sure everything's on the up and up. You know who they don't wand? They don't wand us. So we can use the engine and have good analysis. So that's good they don't wand us. Otherwise, we would be suggesting blunders every move.
That is indeed quite likely. But as it stands, we see everything, we hear everything, and we cheer for everything. As we, again, just fantastic scenes here in Paris for the grand final of the 2026 EWC. And here comes defending champion Magnus Carlsen. He's getting ready to play with the white pieces. In game 1, he opened up with the queen's pawn. Will he go for the same? Will he try something different?
it's hard to beat somebody who never loses a game. If Magnus would lose a game once in a while, then you could get some confidence. But it seems like he just draws and wins every game. His opponent's always on the back foot. Magnus always has more time. Magnus is more confident. Magnus has been there, done that. It's always difficult playing Magnus. Advantage, Magnus.
Yeah. Well, he's a man with a history. He's got an impressive track record. I mean, I don't think it's ever been matched in history. 5-time world champion, multiple-time rapid world champion, blitz world champion, Fisher random world champion, defending EWC champion. I mean, I could go on and on. Magnus Carlsen has won everything, and now he is up against 19-year-old Denis Lazavik, and this time we have a change. It is opening up with the King's Pawn, and Denis keeping it symmetrical. 4 knights on the board.
And those of us who are watching us live, if Magnus wins this game, this set is over. Magnus wins 2.5-half. Denis has to draw or win for the match to continue in this set. First to win 2 sets wins the match. We have a 4 knights scotch, lots of theory. Magnus is playing a really solid line that isn't considered to give white very much. Sometimes white trades on f6, goes into the end game where black has weak pawns and the 2 bishops. Will Magnus go that way, or is Magnus just going to put his rooks in the center? Like, no, he does go that way. Goes into this ending. It's considered this ending is about equal, but Magnus likes to play against those pawn structures, Jovi, those isolated and doubled pawns.
Well, interesting choice, because I was going to say that, yes, this endgame is considered just a little bit better for white, but at the same time, black is still doing okay. On a practical level, it's going to be very difficult to make use and start targeting those weak pawns. And very traditionally, you know, as black, you start taking the open lines, you put your rook there on the open lines, then you start possessing the center and the bishop pair. It's kind of considered like a half-point advantage. And Denis there just considering exactly what to do.
Yeah, at the super grandmaster level, most players don't try this with white because it's considered that black is equalized already with the 2 bishops and so many trades. But Magnus likes to go for those small advantages. Magnus is going to try to trade off minor pieces, get rid of white's 2 bishops, then take advantage of the pawn structure and hopefully put some pressure on those weak, isolated double pawns that Denis has. Denis plays very solid, getting his center pawns forward, putting his bishops in the middle. Magnus puts his rook in the middle, and the game is about equal.
Yeah, you make it sound like a formula. Put your rooks in the middle, and then just start improving your pieces, and boom, boom, Bob's your uncle. Game is over. And here, okay, knight just coming. Well, it's getting ready to jump into the center, and still the players are following the path that has been recommended. You just got to be going forward with your pieces, opening up the diagonals for the bishops. And now here, this bishop comes out. And so if black wants to trade off bishops, it's unadvisable because the knight would be sitting very, very pretty there on the f5, as we know from Ben. It's a knife on f5, but what black tends to do is just develop the pieces, and you just say, hey, if the trade is going to come, it's going to be on my terms. You can correct my pawn structure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and this will be a very funny pawn structure if Lazavik takes the knight on g3. White can take fg, defending the bishop with the rook, and then all the pawns for both sides are weak, but black's pawns are weaker. Denis doesn't want to give the 2 bishops away. That's a nice advantage. He's like, Magnus, if you want to trade bishops, you're going to have to straighten out my pawn structure and take on e6, which obviously Magnus doesn't want to do. That would get rid of black's doubled f pawns. So instead, Magnus is probably going to play something solid and not take on e6. Magnus thinking a long time, trying to find some kind of advantage. Black very solid, bishops in the center, rooks in the center, and says, I got 2 bishops. What you got, Magnus? And Magnus doesn't seem like he's playing all out for a win. He's just playing solid and hopes when they get into time trouble, he can outplay Denis again.
Yeah, this has been a really cagey match so far. No spectacular fireworks at all. It's just been all about the endgame grind. And one thing that I was maybe expecting is the rook to lift up all the way to the middle of the board and maybe set up some checks against the black king. That's one potential plan. Honestly, I'm kind of struggling to think of anything else.
Even in the end game, Jovi's trying to checkmate the king. Gets to the open G line, the open H line, rook D4, rook G4, rook H4, and put pressure on black's king. Not a bad idea. That black king does have an open line in front of it.
Well, what can I say? I'm an impatient person. This is why these guys are paid the big bucks. And instead we have that trade of bishops. And now Denis has been provided the opportunity to correct his pawn structure. And now here, no hesitation whatsoever. You just recapture the pawn. And then you just centralize the bishop and start posting your pieces up to the most active squares. So what is Magnus got planned? Maybe he can still do what I was wanting to do. Lift the rook up, start attacking some pawns.
And he does.
Yes, I get what I wanted. It makes me very happy. So now, big question actually for Denis. How are you going to defend that pawn?
Magnus got rid of his opponent's 2 bishops at the cost of undoubling his pawns. But black still has a lot of weak pawns that Magnus can go to work on. Magnus can double rooks on the D file, can play knight E4. There's a lot of black pawns we can attack. Magnus still fighting for a small advantage. The engine says he doesn't have anything, but Denis will have to defend accurately. Both players have the same amount of time left, 7 minutes. Both players playing very quickly. Denis doing a lot better this game than in game 2, where he got in time trouble pretty early. Denis has a lot of time on the clock, and if he can navigate the complications in the end game and not lose any of his weak pawns, he should be just about equal.
But that is the question, right? Because how is black going to be defending that pawn? Because if you move the rook, the bishop is hanging, and that is not a good trade. Magnus not quite happy. So Denis, I guess, probably has to give up the pawn and get active with his own rooks. Okay, he takes the knight, check from Magnus, and now we see a recapture towards the center, Magnus following the rules. And what happens next? Where is Magnus placing the pressure? Aha, I see his plan. If you just defend the pawn with your rook, the rook that is not working next to the king is going to move into an open line, and Denis, of course, playing much more precisely, advancing his pawn.
Yeah, we have another rook ending. It's our 3rd rook ending in a row. This one has 2 rooks. Is Magnus going to trade rooks now, which I think he will, then put his rook on the open B line and try to attack Denis's pawns? Pretty symmetrical endgame. The engine says it's about equal. I think Denis has done a good job solving whatever problems he had this endgame. I think Magnus is going to be displeased that he couldn't get any advantage. He surprised me by playing rook D1. I thought he'd play rook B1 because black can play king E7 in this position and stop Magnus's rook from infiltrating. But he doesn't really mind. He wants to play active himself, rook B2, take the pawn on C2. Denis looks pretty comfortable now, Jovi.
Yeah, I'm going to say this opening has really not gone that great for Magnus. Okay, we're looking now at this probably finishing in a draw. I'm going to be seeing that the pawns are just going to get liquidated on the left side, and it's going to be 3 versus 3 in a rook and pawn in-game. King has to step up, and this is Denis's idea. Rook takes pawn, going to be also met by a capture, and we're seeing it right here, right now.
This is our 3rd game in a row. We've had rook and 4 against rook and 4. I'm going to call my bookie and tell him rook and 4 versus rook and 4 in game 4, because it seems like every game is going like that. Magnus still trying to get an advantage by moving his king up the board. He played G4. He's going to play king G3, but there's nothing really here. This should be a fairly easy draw for Lazavik. Magnus doesn't really have any pawn breakthroughs, can't really attack anything. This should be a fairly simple draw, and we're going to go to game 4 of the match with Magnus with a 2-1 lead, with Magnus needing a draw to win the first set.
Yeah, so this is really clever approach from Magnus. He's actually maybe going to try and draw out the remaining 2 games, say, hey, I'm going to take the first match, and then that's it. Because in the next game, if this is just a comfortable draw, then Denis is going to have to go all out for the win. Okay, as we see, more pawns get traded off. Rook and 3 versus rook and 3. And the big thing is that the kings are more or less the same.
Yeah,
and the players are repeating. This is going to be a draw. And now going into game 4, Denis is in a must-win situation.
Denis is in a must-win situation, Jovi, but he does have the white pieces, so that's good. Yeah, Magnus got nothing out of that opening. That opening doesn't have a reputation for giving white an advantage, and we saw why. Denis with accurate defense, didn't have to take very long. I'm sure Magnus is going to be a little unhappy he couldn't get any advantage at all. And Denis draws easily with black. Now Magnus has to hold the draw with black to win the first set.
Yeah, and Magnus really going into business mode, right? That was effortless from him. Easy draw. And now the pressure is on Denis because he has to beat the world number one. You got the white pieces. The white pieces did not work out well for him in game two. He was the one. Denis was the one that was scrambling for that draw. He has to shake things up. He has to take the game into unpredictable waters, something that Magnus is not able to navigate clearly and smoothly.
It's funny, in game one, Magnus played d4, then Magnus changed up to e4. Denis can do the same thing. Denis played d4, didn't get any advantage. I wonder if he'll play e4 and try to mix it up like Magnus playing e4 in game three. We're going to find out pretty shortly, Ovi. Here comes game four right now. He sticks with d4, and they play, so far, same opening as the first game. Oh, we have an Imzo Indian. I haven't seen a lot of Imzo Indians this tournament.
Yeah, well, this is actually a sign from Denis that he wants to shake things up. Denis traditionally favors opening up with the queen's pawn. So now we're going to be in territory where things are going to get sharp. And look at this. Magnus, he doesn't actually go in with the queen's pawn. He challenges in the center with the c pawn, and decisions to be made here. Does Denis play very carefully? Does he reinforce that center? Does he go for some other idea, something that he particularly likes, which is to develop the light squared bishop, fianchetto it, or will we see more aggressive going into the center?
Yeah, typically the aggressive way for white to play in this position is to play g3 and fianchetto the bishop, which I think is to Denis's liking. So I expect Denis to play g3. Seems like he's not super familiar with this position after c5. Maybe he was expecting d5 and getting those more normal queen pawn openings. Instead, Denis plays a surprising move, surprising to me. Takes the pawn on c5. Little shrug of the face from Magnus, like that's not the most common move. Now, black can play aggressively with either knight e4, queen a5, or simply castle or take the pawn back on c5 and play sort of a more boring, standard way of playing. Let's see what Magnus is in the mood for.
Yeah, and Magnus has his choice. As you mentioned, you can develop the knight, you can also castle, and you also can take the knight. We've seen the triple pawns once before. Why not see it again? That's also a possibility. You can also just simply recapture. Those are the main moves. Magnus is a very principled guy. I'm expecting that he just goes with his knight to the edge of the board. But, ooh, Magnus just trying to remember the theory.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Chess has so many possibilities. Even on move 5 or 6, players can be confused, not really in their main prep. And advantage Lazavik if Magnus can't bang out a few dozen moves in the opening of his prep, get an equal position. Magnus makes another move I didn't consider, just developing his knight to c6. He wants to take back on c5 with his bishop instead of with his knight, as you were suggesting. And eventually, white has to decide whether to play e3 bishop e2 or g3 bishop g2, and possibly he might even move the bishop on c1 first. So very unusual Nimzo Indian. The players seem like they're both out of their prep, and Magnus shaking his head, very confused.
Yeah, what seems to be bugging Magnus there? Well, white has plenty of moves, a lot of them that you suggested, Ben. You can also just take the time out to defend the knight. You can move the bishop up one square. You can also come out with your queen. And maybe Magnus and Denis understanding that actually the game is transposing into a line that perhaps Magnus didn't really want to be going into. Main move here is to come out with the bishop all the way, pin the knight.
I've had white in this position many times in my career because I play queen c2 Nimzo Indian. A3's a little passive move. Bishop g5 is more common. Bishop f4 is also played. I play bishop g5 myself. I've actually had this position too because I've played a3 with the bishop on b4, then they take on c5 just for a different move order. Typically, when white plays a3, Lazavik is thinking of playing b4 and fianchettoing his bishop and gaining space on the queen side. And black has two ways to play now. Black can play an early d5 or black can retreat the bishop to e7 and fianchetto the other bishop, play sort of a hedgehog structure. Magnus is trying to figure out whether to fianchetto his queen bishop, which is what he did, or play d5 right away, which he can still do later. But Magnus wants to play bishop b7, rook c8, and have his rook oppose the queen on c2. This is one of White's main problems in this opening, is the c file is half open, and the queen on c2 can get harassed by Magnus's rook.
And ironically enough, Denis's heart rate is actually at a low, because usually we see him around about 120, 130 mark. Now he's down to 110. So he's feeling kind of calm. He's managed to unsettle Magnus. Magnus is the one that has used up some time in the opening, and now big decision for Denis. Remember, Denis must take a decision quickly. He can continue as he started, just pick up his queenside pawns and start harassing the dark square bishop, or he can come out and set a pin. And he goes for another move. Okay, this is normal as well. This is also good. But at some point or another, you have to do what is necessary. And here it comes. That bishop is now going to place itself on the longest diagonal on the board. And now Magnus, he is fighting a space disadvantage. He needs to react.
Yeah, I think I probably had White in this position before, just by transposition, because I play Queen Students so often with White. And often my queen has to move away from c2 at some point before black gets to play rook c8 and d5, and my queen is misplaced. The queen sometimes goes to b1 after the white rook goes to d1 first, or the queen can go to b3. Right now there's no threats. Magnus just castled. So black can play bishop e2 and short castle, put the rooks in the center, and with more space on the queen side, White's slightly better position for White. So Denis should be pretty happy with the result of the opening.
Exactly. So let's just put it on the board, exactly what White wants to do. You can go anywhere you like with the bishops. You can step up one square, even two squares. But either way, you're going to be castling the king to the right and just taking the center with the rooks and just arguing and saying to black, hey, you don't have so much space, and there is going to be an opening up of the center eventually. So I think it's a good position to have when you're in a must-win situation with the white pieces.
No, if I was White here, I'd be happy if I was Denis. Denis has a position where he can get a slight advantage. Magnus is a little passive, not clear what black should do. And Magnus has to make a decision in the next three moves whether to play d6 or d5. And it's not clear what he should play because it leads to different kinds of positions. And I'm not sure what Magnus is going to do. d6 is more of a long game, playing a hedgehog kind of pawn structure we talked about yesterday, where black's pawn's just sitting on the third rank. d5 is more aggressive. Magnus isn't making the decision. He's moving his queen to b8, getting out of this place of the rook. The other rook can go to d8. Magnus isn't going to decide for a couple more moves whether to play d6 or d5. But Magnus doesn't seem very happy. He keeps shaking his head. I think he knows that he's slightly worse and that White has more space on the queen side. This isn't the opening kind of position that Magnus wanted.
Yeah, one of the problems with this type of position is as White, you're looking actually to unleash the dark squared bishop. So moves that you want to be doing is jumping in with your knight to perhaps the g5 square, moving, or maybe moving the knight to e4. If you manage to transfer the white queen and pick her up, put her on the right side of the board, that is going to be a fearsome attack against the black king. That is the theory. Whether it will be done, as we see these two little luxurious take care of your king moves being played.
I like luxurious. I wasn't thinking that, but that.
But they are. These are the kind
really
of moves that you make after you completed development, and still no concrete decision from both sides, except there is no longer going to be any attack towards the black king because the white queen has stepped off that diagonal. And here it's going to be again another long game of maneuvering.
Yeah, and I've had these kinds of positions a lot with White. The c4 pawn is often weak, so I like the queen on b3, bishop on e2, protecting the c4 pawn. Magnus plays queen a8, lining his queen and bishop up on the long diagonal. White played rook d2, which indicates he wants to double rooks on the d file, putting pressure on d6. Typically, White plays bishop f1 at some point, defending the g2 pawn from the queen and bishop. But Magnus doesn't let him play bishop f1. Magnus plays knight b8. He's going to reroute his knight to d7 so that his queen, rook, and bishop on the queen side aren't blocked anymore. The knight usually wants to be on d7, not c6, because the knight on c6 is blocking all of black's pieces. So Magnus maneuvering his pieces around, slightly passive position, but as I've had problems my whole career, hard for white to do anything here. White has more space, but how do you increase your advantage?
Well, I gotta say, black's position is like a spring that is waiting to uncoil, right? So now the knight is gonna get rerouted, maybe even go and step next to its monarch just to hold it in complete defense. And then the whole thing is that black will eventually break forward in the center, and suddenly this queen and bishop, beautiful battery, is going to be pointing at the light squares. And I'm going to say that black is completely fine, despite the fact that that queen is there in the corner. We don't advise that queens are living their best life on the edge of the board. And okay, the rook steps up. What is Denis's plan? And Magnus just keeps on playing the waiting game.
Yeah, typically black plays a6 earlier in this structure to stop white from playing knight b5. But Magnus wasn't worried about knight b5 because then he would counterattack in the center with d5. So white played rook d4. Not really sure what white's plan is. He could trade white squared bishops with bishop f3. Okay, so he did. But I'm not sure that gets him anywhere. Black doesn't mind trading and being slightly passive and solid and awaiting developments. For some reason, Lazavik has been taking quite a long time trying to figure out a way to build up his advantage. As a consequence, Magnus has 2 extra minutes on the clock. That could be important later in the game. We can't have this happen every game, Yovi, that Magnus is ahead 1, 2, 3 minutes on the clock. That's not going to bode well for Lazavik.
No, and there you're seeing Magnus, he's maximizing his queen, she's moving forward. The target is that weak pawn, the pawn that cannot be defended there on c4. That's exactly what Magnus is thinking. Maybe he's going to even triple on that half-open line, and there's going to be huge pressure for Denis as the clock ticks down. And remember, if Denis wants to take this match to Armageddon, if he wants to level, he needs to win with the white pieces. And the problem is there's no easy point of attack. Everything in Magnus's position is well defended. This is the description of overprotection.
No, this is really nice maneuver using the first rank. Super grandmasters are great at using the first rank to maneuver their pieces. Knight b8 to d7, I've seen that before. And now Magnus very quickly plays b5, putting pressure on the pawn on c4. And once the c and b pawns are traded, then Magnus can play d5 later, and the rooks on the d file are sort of hitting on that strong d pawn. I actually like black's position now. I'd rather have black. This doesn't look like white can do anything. And not only that, Denis is taking a lot of time. Looks like he's really getting outplayed this game. Black has the advantage. Black has more center pawns. Black has 3 extra minutes. So far, advantage Magnus. And it's a must-win game for Denis. Denis is down 2-1. It's a 4-game match, the first set. Denis has to win to force Armageddon. Otherwise, he's down 1-0. So far, it's looking like all Magnus this game, Yovi.
Yeah, I was going to say, look at that. The knight comes in, it's going to post up into the middle of the board. And the thing is, and this is going to be Denis's biggest challenge, is that his strengths are the same strengths that Magnus possesses. They have very much the same style. It's very clinical, very patient, and we see why Magnus is the world #1. So decision here, do you recapture with the knight? That looks very logical. Or do you just start to change the nature of the position? He takes with the pawn, and now I'm expecting those pawns to start advancing.
Yeah, I like this. I like what's transpired here, and perspired for Denis, because the game is really tricky now with game becoming completely asymmetrical. Black's position is still better, but at least white has 2 passed pawns, something you can look forward to later. Magnus is going to have to play his best game now to make sure white doesn't advance those pawns and make sure Denis doesn't blockade the queenside pawns. Magnus played the moves he thought they were the best. But maybe this made the game trickier and puts Denis back in the game, even though Denis has a big time disadvantage. Maybe he can catch up if Magnus can't figure out how to prosecute this initiative in the center.
Yeah, he doesn't have to rush though, because it's not going to be very easy for white to mobilize the pawns on the left. You know, if you step up with one pawn, the bishop is going to come in, perhaps capture, perhaps start eyeballing some squares. So this position definitely has gotten a lot riskier for both sides, but Magnus still has some time. He does improve his king, and Denis needing to win, he starts to grab space on the right side of the board. But the left is where it's all happening.
No, I think Magnus still has an excellent position, but I think the match dictates that since white must win, things have been improving white's position for that perspective. I think there's more winning chances. Pushing all of his pawns on both sides of the board, Magnus trades the knights. Magnus shaking his head, doesn't like the way he's been playing this position. The engine agrees. The engine actually likes white now. White has a nice blockade in the center. Ooh. White's playing aggressively on the king side. F5, very aggressive move from Denis.
Yeah, but what a beautiful move, because suddenly, what are you going to do about the pawn that's under fire? If you step up, chase away the white knight, well, it leaves behind a weak sibling there in the middle. That's not going to be easy to defend. And suddenly, just like that, black's pawns could have become immobilized and now sitting targets. And we could here be seeing perhaps the start of Denis taking over. Tax the rook. Rook has to move. Now you can come over with the other pawn, and it's going to be white's two pawns on the left that are going to be racing up the board. Denis, 1 minute and 26 seconds, and he has to generate play. He has to put the pressure. He doesn't play the pawn move that I wanted. Instead, he challenges in the center. Is this the right direction, though?
Denis is making a lot of pawn moves, F5, B5, E4. The engine likes some of them, doesn't like other ones. It says the position's about equal. Denis still has a problem on the clock, but this is a 3-result game. All 3 results can happen. Both sides have lots of passed pawns. Magnus sacrifices the exchange, getting rid of white's dangerous passed B pawn. Now black has 2 dangerous pawns. Magnus is pretty happy with himself. I think he likes his exchange sack because he has the beautiful pawn duo on D4 and C4.
Exactly, and he's going to take over, because it's not about what the pieces are, it's what they do. And take a look at that pawn center that Magnus has. They are primed and ready to advance. And Magnus doesn't even have to rush. He can do things in his normal trademark style. Just start improving the king. He can also improve the knight. It's going to be such a difficult task for Denis to win this one. Magnus advancing the pawn. So maybe Denis can do the same in turn. Maybe he can sacrifice some pieces.
Boy, Magnus is really excited at this point in time. He's really yelling at what's going on. C3, the D pawn is pinned. The D4 pawn is pinned. The bishop on C3 is pinned. Everything is pinned to the center. There's a lot of tactics. King E8, the engine likes that move, defending the knight. We couldn't take the bishop on C3 because the knight was hanging. Now both sides have passed pawns.
But definitely, I got to say that Denis is improving his position as he's gotten rid of black's biggest asset. But we're seeing Magnus, he's just holding firm. He does have plenty of material for that sacrificed exchange, the rook, and now the rook coming down. I mean, he's got a lovely fortress going on, and just take a look at Denis's time, under 30 seconds.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. 27 seconds. Magnus has 1:49. The position's about equal. Black has more than enough compensation for the exchange. Magnus is putting his knight in on F4. Magnus has the better king with King E5. The engine says Magnus is taking over now. White's rooks are really terrible behind all those pawns. All of White's pawns are hanging. Magnus is now winning on the board and on the clock. Magnus's pawns are too strong, and White's in a lot of trouble. Here comes the F pawn. Here comes the D pawn. Here comes the black king. As we like to say, black is a king ahead. White's king isn't playing. Black's king is on the 5th rank. And
there comes another one, a beautiful
bishop C3.
block.
Beautiful move.
Yes.
And several seconds left. Lazavik didn't see bishop C3. Lazavik resigns. Magnus wins. really complicated game. Lazavik had his chances, Yovi.
Well, Denis definitely had his chances there. I mean, at some point it was looking really complicated with pass pawns galore. But Magnus there in the end showing his class, sacrificing his rook for the piece and the pawn and getting such good compensation in return. And you just see how he levels up when the clock starts ticking down.
Yeah, basically the secret to EWC, I figured it out. It took me 2 times coming here to do it. Don't get paired with Magnus. That's the secret. If you don't get paired with Magnus, then you're okay.
Yeah, and Magnus still keeping his untouchable record alive. He hasn't lost a single game in this event.
This tournament's unfair because Magnus doesn't get to be paired with.
And the challenge is on for our players. For Magnus Carlsen, well, will he try to clinch it in the second match? And for Denis, he has to make a comeback. He has to beat Magnus. How can he do that? Well, it does look like mission impossible. But one thing for sure is you do need to unsettle the giant.
No, I think the one thing that Denis has going for him is his age. He's 19. He doesn't know that he can't beat Magnus, thinks he can. He lost the first set 3-1. He has to win the second set to bring it to a third set. Magnus looks like he's in the groove. He's ready to go. Denis has to win this set. Denis has white the first game. Denis has to come out strong. And I think the style of the first few games was really in Magnus's favor. I think Denis has to be more aggressive, play more tactically, put Magnus on the back foot, and get an advantage that way. I think the slow maneuvering game is right up Magnus's alley, and I think Denis has got to change it up if he wants to change the direction of the match.
Exactly. He doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. He doesn't have to make a radical change. He just has to be prepared to hit that chaos button a little bit more. It's in the dynamics that Magnus Carlsen is perhaps a little bit sensitive, but for Magnus Carlsen, he's in business mode. When he gets going, and he's just saying it is all going in my direction.
Yeah, to win this set, we have to win one game first. Nobody's beaten Magnus yet. Magnus is the reigning champion. He's in good form this tournament. Seems like each day Magnus gets better. Back to business for Denis, back to D4. We've seen this in the previous games. And Magnus seemed a little bit upset at the opening last game. This game's different. White plays same-ish variation with A3. So we have a dynamic kind of position. I think this is a good idea for Denis to get the position more dynamic and not so boring, Yovi.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want any rook and 4 pawns against rook and 4 pawns. So that's why we're seeing Denis. Actually, he's heeding the words of wisdom from us all. He's just saying, you know what, I'm going to try and establish a big center. And we'll see whether that pays off as Magnus just establishing his pawn structure, everything tight, compact for the time being. But now it's going to be a question of castling and getting that light squared bishop onto the long diagonal.
There was a game played a couple of days ago between 2 of the top American players, Caruana and Wesley, and they had this position, and Wesley was black and ended up winning a very long, complicated game. I wonder if both players are familiar with that game because it was just played recently, or if it was too recent and they're not paying attention to other tournaments that are going around. Usually, guys at this level, they know when other 2,700 players are playing and they're ready and they're really well prepared. And in that game and in this game, Magnus is going to play knight A5 and bishop A6 and rook C8.
Yeah, exactly. And just go for that weak pawn there that's completely alone and undefended. So this is the typical, what we call the Nimzo Indian plan. You put pressure against this, whereas white has got all the pieces on the other side of the board, and we could be seeing liftoff there. You don't really care about a pawn. It's all about the attack and the flow.
Yeah, black wants to win those isolated queenside pawns. That's what Magnus did. He played knight A5, putting pressure on C4. Bishop A6 is coming, rook C8, and white's going to play on the king side and the center by pushing there and trying to get an attack. And I think this is what Denis has to do, is get this kind of complex position, possibly sacrifice a pawn, and try to get Magnus thinking early to a very complicated position.
Yeah, exactly. And this is actually what we're going to be seeing right now. So a big decision on the board, take the pawn, or do you want to be doing something else? I personally would capture because that pawn structure is very beautiful. And now there's nothing you can do about that C-pawn. It is gone for good. So what you do instead is you start to just either expand or you start to initiate some kind of pins.
Yeah, white's going to have to play on the center and the king side, take advantage of Magnus's uncastled king. Magnus is like, I'm solid, I'm going to win the c-pawn. This is a Magnus type of position, and Denis has to make the game double-edged, complicated, sacrifice a pawn, attack Magnus's king, and try to get Magnus in time trouble. So far, Magnus playing really quickly, as is Denis. They both seem to understand the ins and outs of the position. But yeah, the c-pawn's a goner. Magnus is going to take that soon. The only question is, will Magnus castle first or leave his king on e8?
Yeah, and also Denis has to play very accurately right now because one of his most important pieces is that light squared bishop. You want to preserve it. You don't want to be allowing bishop takes pawn and then seeing the trade happen because that is one great attacker. So it's a good move is perhaps to lift up the rook so you're prepared to move away. Other moves that have been tried is to develop that dark square bishop and set up a pin, but you shouldn't go into battle without a sword. You need to know what you're doing as white in this position.
Yeah, Denis doesn't want to trade pieces. Of course, as you pointed out, if Magnus takes on c4, he'll take with the bishop, getting rid of white's two bishops. Denis can move the rook off of f1, so the bishop can retreat. Denis can also play bishop g5 here, and instead he plays another aggressive move, f4, wants to play e5 and start attacking Magnus's king. Magnus looks a little disturbed by f4, a very aggressive move. I really like the way this game is going for Denis. He doesn't have a better position, but he has the kind of position that I think leads more to wins and losses than the draws and slightly worse positions that he was getting in the first match.
Exactly. It marks a change of style from Denis. He's just saying, hey, I'm not going to go down without a fight. No more groveling for me in an inferior endgame. And now after castles, we are going to be seeing maybe from Denis, yay, he's going gung-ho as he just starts to launch an attack against Magnus's king. And, well, Magnus saying there will be no pin in town as that g5 square is covered.
Yeah, Denis wanted to play bishop g5 and knight h5 and e5, and Magnus is stopping bishop g5. We could see some sacrifices this game, Yovi. We could see some attacks against Magnus's king. Can Magnus defend? Or is Denis going to break through on the king side? Denis thinking about his different options. Should he play e5? Should he do a rook lift? He does the rook lift. Rook f4. He wants to play e5. He wants to play rook h4. He wants to play knight h5. Wants to attack on the king side. Magnus quickly takes the pawn on c4. Magnus wants to trade pieces. Magnus could take either way on c4. They both look reasonable. Magnus is a little unsure. Decides to take with the rook, putting pressure on the d4 pawn. Magnus won his pawn, that doubled c-pawn. White has the initiative on the king side. Magnus looks pretty perturbed. He looks like he's unhappy with developments. Denis looks cool and calm. The engine says white's better. It likes white's attack. Can he prosecute the attack and get on the scoreboard, or is Magnus going to win and draw again, which he's done every match so far in this event?
Exactly. You know what I'm going to say? Actually, this is a game for two results. Now, not going to be a win or a draw. Actually, the position has gone so bold, so crazy, that either black is going to hold the defense and win, or Denis is going to crash through. Now here, I got to say, you got to be a bit careful because there are sacrifices in town. There is a bishop takes pawn in the air, followed by some destruction of the king side. And now, it is really critical for Magnus. Magnus needs to take some time out to protect his king, but Magnus not feeling happy with his position.
No, Magnus doesn't have that good poker face he usually has. He's gesticulating wildly. Looks like he's unhappy with his position. Looks like Denis is attacking, playing the right style. Magnus seems pretty unhappy with the situation. It's actually typical of this line in the Nimzo. White sacrifices the c-pawn and plays for an attack. So it seems completely normal. But Magnus thinks that things have worked out in Denis's favor, that Denis has the advantage. And boy, Magnus really looks forlorn. This is the most unhappy Magnus has looked in the EWC. White's position isn't winning by any means. The engine says Magnus' position is fine. Magnus just doesn't like it.
No, Magnus not entirely happy with his position. But okay, it's not bad. He just has to make sure that there are no sacrifices in town. I mean, one natural thing is that the queen and the rook, they are on the same diagonal. So if you do move the knight backwards, then the rook will have to move. And there we're seeing Magnus. Well, he's spending some time, and this is entirely understandable, because where do you go with the knight? Do you go towards the right, towards the king, or do you go in a different direction? Either way, the problem is that, okay, he moves towards the center. Okay, well, this is an interesting move. Okay, the engines is saying...
Engine doesn't like anything,
mark.
although it was a good idea to attack that rook on h4. The question is White simply going to move the rook and keep the initiative, or is Denis going to move his queen into the territory on g4, h5, and continue making threats against Black's king?
Yeah, I think the 3 is the magic number when it comes to attack, and that's exactly what Denis is building up. I mean, it's very natural, I gotta say, to move it. Okay, I was gonna say move the queen in, and now here, not the best move, but big threat in town. Bishop takes pawn. Now, one thing that I would be tempted to do, just because I'm a chicken and I don't like being attacked, is actually rook takes bishop. I was thinking about doing
sacrifice
that.
The exchange.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing that if the queen were going to come in that direction, but maybe this is just me being desperate. No, it happens.
Magnus heard you.
Okay.
Double exclam. Good job, Yovi.
Well, we have to show why this could be a good move. So if you capture with the queen, then there are some forks in town. So let's have a look. Queen takes rook. Now, first up, you can't jump in there because the queen will actually come and take the pawn on h6. Well, that's not the best move.
Well, queen f6, the engine still says it's okay because White's pieces are all attacked.
Okay.
This is too complicated for a non-engine.
Well,
all the pieces are attacked. If you trade queens, then both rooks are attacked.
Still, looks like it's actually okay for Black, but it appears that Black had something better. But I just got to say that there's so many ideas of the knight dropping back, the knight jumping in, and suddenly the situation has turned completely because Black has neutralized White's attack. So I don't think you want to be capturing with the queen. If you capture with the rook, then...
There's another fork.
Oh, it's relentless. Beautiful move, beautiful move. And after the queen moves, knight takes rook, and it's already, I'm going to say, better for Black, courtesy of being extra material up.
Yeah, rook g4, not a very precise move from Denis. Magnus takes advantage of it by sacking on c1, a move that you predicted. Now Denis is thinking a long time. It's one of the first double exclam moves of the match, and it's looking good for Magnus right now.
Yeah, but what a move. And now the knight comes in and starts attacking the queen, the rook, and it's going to be very difficult for Denis now as he does go down a pawn. And what a beautiful shot there from Magnus. So quick, rook takes bishop. Just seeing those tactics, those forks, almost instantly.
Yeah, almost as quickly as you saw it. Always sacrifice the exchange, one of my favorite rules. Now, is Magnus going to play queen g5 and try to trade queens, or queen f6? He's got to move his queen somewhere towards his king before White plays something like knight h5 and f6. Queen f6 defending g7, attacking the d4 pawn with check. Magnus is a pawn up. Denis is trying to attack. The engine says Magnus is better. It loved his exchange sacrifice. He got the exchange back. Now, Denis obviously overlooked the exchange sacrifice, taking a lot of time to figure out the ins and outs of the position. And now Denis, as per usual this match, has a lot less time, not a recipe for success.
No, not a recipe for success, but I mean, the choices are really unpleasant here because first up, do you want to put your rook behind its own pawn? And this is going to allow the black knight to infiltrate. Also, I would be tempted to go with my rook, with the black rook, and try and take an open line. Knowing Magnus, he might just simply try and swap off queens and just argue that, hey, he stands better.
But his knight e3 worked out so well before, maybe he wants to play knight e3 again. So knight c4, threatening knight e3, the same queen and rook fork with the queen and rook in reverse positions. You don't see that very often. Instead, was rook c8 played, or that's analysis? Oh, that's analysis. Okay. So, yeah, Magnus is still thinking. It seems like the logical moves are rook c8, taking the open file, or knight c4. But as you pointed out, Magnus might want to trade queens, g5, and the engine doesn't like it. The engine says he shouldn't play queen g5. The d4 pawn's not attacked anymore. So here comes rook activity. And this is a two-result game. It was win or lose, but now it's win or draw for Magnus. Magnus is still a pawn ahead. White doesn't have much compensation. White has the active rook, but black has the extra pawn. Black's king is really safe. So far, things have worked out in Magnus's favor since he sacrificed the exchange.
Yeah, and there is some compensation for Denis here, I gotta say. You know, the active rook, that's annoying for starters. And it's not gonna be very easy for the black rook to get into the game. So natural moves that you really wanna be playing is like coming in with your rook, taking control over the open line. But this is gonna be met with ideas like the knight's coming in, the pawn takes pawn. I mean, and the white rook can just be really awkward. So we see Magnus instead just anchoring his knight to the middle of the board. And yeah, but what is a good move for white to start to hold it together?
Yeah, if I was white, I would be attacking those B and D pawns. I see my engine friend wants to play A4, A5 and trade off and try to draw the position. But I like black's position. Magnus is not only a pawn up, Magnus has that beautiful knight on D4. Denis, not to be outdone, wants to reposition his knight to D5, which takes a while, but the knight on D5 is going to be really strong for white. Unfortunately, Denis has a couple of weak pawns on A3 and E4. Magnus plays knight B5. The engine doesn't like the way either side is playing now. Both sides have a lot of pawns that are loose. It likes knight C3, attacking the E4 pawn, which not only wins a pawn, but it defends the D6 pawn. Then Magnus will have a passed D pawn, and probably with that a winning position. Things are going in Magnus's favor the last few moves, Yovi.
Exactly, and I just love the way that Magnus quickly went on that knight odyssey. He didn't even pause. And the whole idea is that, yes, you give up one pawn, but once the knight grabs that pawn in the middle, it becomes an octo knight, and it's the white king that is in serious danger. I mean, you almost have to go on the complete passive, and if you have to do that with your rook and your knight, then there's no way that you're going to be holding this position a pawn down. So what can Denis do to hold on? He's got less than 1 minute 32 seconds on the clock. The king comes up, but
there's
knight
a move
takes
I
pawn.
wouldn't have thought of.
Exactly. He's giving up the pawn with check.
Yeah, not only is Magnus on an Odyssey, he was also on The Simpsons with Homer. That's how he knows so much about the Odyssey. And one of the few players who's been on a cartoon about chess. Magnus is so famous, The Simpsons were lucky to have him. He was better than Homer, and looks like he's better than Lazavik this game. Another end game, this time they have knights. Magnus has two connected pass pawns in the center. It's a matter of technique. Magnus has an extra minute and a half on the clock. Somehow the game went from complicated, double-edged tactics to Magnus figuring it out, sacking the exchange, getting rid of Denis's attack, and going into a winning endgame. Typical Magnus. He's really in good form this match, Yovi.
Totally. And look at Magnus go. He's going to start just advancing his pawns in the middle. He doesn't even have to be precise. Either one will do. And now I'm expecting the other pawn to start attacking. Let's get going. What should you do with passed pawns? You should push him. Even you can allow a check with the knight, because the king will step up and attack the white rook. Forktown does not work for Denis. And look at that. He just does it. He's cold-blooded. He's calculated it all out.
Yeah, it's looking bad for Denis. Those pawns are too strong. This game's not going to go much longer. Denis down to a minute. An auspicious start for Denis in the second set. Brilliant game from Magnus. Brilliant exchange sacrifice. Great endgame technique. Played faster. Just more of the same.
Yeah. Magnus showing us he is number one. And I like the way that he's setting up the tricks, because here I would be doing this, knight takes pawn, but Magnus doesn't even need to push his pawn. He just pins the knight, and that knight is going to fall. He takes it. Okay, well, maybe there's still some kind of chance for Denis, you know, if he manages to swap off all the pawns. A rook and knight against a rook is going to be a draw, but to be honest, that is just a wishful thought.
No, Magnus brilliantly defends his G5 pawn. He doesn't care about the A pawn. He'll win that later. He just wants to make sure he keeps his 2 pawns. Rook F5. Magnus must not have seen that because he seemed upset about that move. He really tried hard to keep his G pawn. Rook F5 was the last chance. Magnus should still win the rook and knight when pawn versus rook and 2, but it's not so simple with just 1 pawn on the side of the board.
No, exactly. Knights are actually really difficult. It's really difficult to defend those rook pawns because now the knight is going to get chased around and now the white king is going to step forward. That's the only chance. And the black king, Denis, going for different technique.
Zugzwang.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no move in that position. Any move white makes will make his position worse. He was in Zugzwang. Really nice technique for Magnus. We say that a lot. And time advantage on the board, outcalculated. I mean, it was a good try by Denis. It just looked like when he played rook G4, he wasn't really in that position. He missed the exchange sacrifice, and Magnus took over after that.
A great showing there from King Magnus, as our crowd call him. And what a game it was. You know, rook takes bishop being the killer move. And the way that he navigated those complications, he looked a little bit flustered at the beginning, but once he got going, he won and he takes the advantage in the second set. So for Denis, he'll have the black pieces. Magnus has shown us he's willing to open up with the king's pawn, the queen's pawn. And Magnus is also ruthlessly practical. He's been locking down the game. He's going into business mode and just making sure that Denis doesn't get any complications whatsoever.
Maybe Magnus is just lucky, but he's lucky every time. That's the problem. So if you're just joining us, Magnus won the first set, 3-1. This is the second set. Magnus is up 1-0. Both players having a tough time after that first game of the match. Chess is a tough game, and players are really concentrating on the second game, which is about to start any second. The crowd's cheering. They can't wait for game 2. Magnus has the white pieces after winning with black in game 1. We're about to start. Will Magnus play D4 or E4? He seems equally comfortable in both. Plays D4 this game, and we're off.
We are off, and a different approach from Denis. He's come to this one determined as he takes on the King's Indian. No more classical chess. It's now going to be all about imbalances and taking risks. Denis wants this. He wants to win. And we're seeing from Magnus, bishop developing nicely. And now what is he going to... Oh, he's going to kill the game.
Oh, he's playing my line. This is what I play with white.
He's going to kill the game. He's going to be straight into the end game. Look at this.
Wow, you can play bishop G5 or knight D5, and I play bishop G5.
Okay.
This is my line. I do this on my stream every day.
Well, you can take us through the ins and outs of this one bet. But one thing I know is that for sure you must not chase away that bishop, because that would not be the best.
No, rook E8's the most common move. Knight D5 is more common than castles. I usually castle in that position. Now black plays C6, white plays bishop C4, and black has to decide whether to play B5 or not. They actually do completely different positions. So bishop C4 will be played. B5 is the more interesting move. Taking on D5 right away is the more solid move. I lost a game about 6 years ago to Alexander Shabalov. He played B5 and he knew more theory than I did. B5 is the more interesting move.
Okay, chasing back the bishop. You said this was the most interesting.
Yes.
So Denis needs to go into this one. It's a ride or die time for Denis, because the last thing he needs is for Magnus just to coast through the remaining 3 games with an easy position. Okay, well, there's ideas of chasing down that light square bishop even more. So I'm expecting white to say, hang on a second, let's also seize the space. And indeed, it does happen. And now for Denis, how is he going to keep that spark alive?
Yeah, A4 is the right move. When I played against Shabalov, I played A3, and in the game he told me that was wrong. So, and then I got a disadvantage and was outplayed and lost. But A4 is the right move. This position is just equal. White doesn't really have an advantage, but it's very hard. Unless you're me, it's really hard for white to lose. So again, Magnus is having a true result game, trying to get a slight advantage. He'll either win or draw. Black is trying to equalize the position by trading the pawns on the queen side. Magnus can take either way here. They're both theory. Takes with the bishop, pinning the pawn on C6, bishop D7, and we're going to get a pretty symmetrical pawn structure that's pretty equal, Yovi.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, how do you avoid white just trading off the minor pieces and then just also trading off the rooks? It just feels like this position is going to fizzle out. As we see, pawn takes pawn. Now, for me, bishop takes pawn makes the most sense. It's the most natural. I don't think you could be doing anything else. And what will Magnus do? Will he finally castle? Will he actually go bishop takes bishop himself?
A lot of times white plays king e2 because you want your king in the center in the endgame, and the rook can go to c1. The bishop can't take on e4 because it's pinned to the rook. So typically white doesn't castle in this line. White just leaves the king in the center, and black trades pieces and tries to equalize. The engine says it's equal. I'd still rather have white because black has to get finished developing. The bishop on g7 is a little iffy, but this position's about equal.
Okay, so equal position. But the problem for Denis is that it's a relatively simple position. The plans, as you highlighted, are very clear. You step up with the king, you trade the pieces, you put those rooks on open lines, you swap, and Magnus coasts ever closer to winning the second match because he is a pawn to the good. And Magnus going for a new idea, well, new-ish, dropping the bishop back and saying maybe he wants to have the better of that draw.
Yeah, he's trying to put pressure on the a5 pawn. Magnus doesn't seem too happy with himself. The bishop can go to c3. White can play king e2. White can put pressure on e5 and a5. But black should equalize with accurate play. It's not really much for white, but Magnus wanted to make sure he didn't get a complex position in a King's Indian. He wanted to keep it simple, but maybe he kept it a little too simple.
Well, we'll find out as the rook moves. And now there is a big threat. Bishop takes pawn, and Denis has that in the bank, so Magnus has to do something about that.
Yeah, typically in this opening, white plays knight d2 at some point, defending the e4 pawn, and the knight can go to c4 and b6 and d6. That's why Magnus was very unhappy with his bishop d2 move. He took that square away from his knight. Now, as you pointed out, the e4 pawn is hanging.
Wow. Big vibes here in the arena in Paris as we are playing in the grand final of the EWC. Magnus leads by 1-0, and Denis now finding himself in a position where he is perhaps slightly worse, in a position that Magnus is going to feel extremely comfortable. He castles the king, that rook is going to post up to the C line, and big question for Denis, how is he going to generate any winning chances? The answer is it's going to be super difficult. So we might be looking at this game fizzling out and everything being perhaps decided in game 3.
I think at this point, Denis would be happy with a draw. He doesn't have any winning chances. He's just trying to complete development. Black's trying to play knight c6 to d4. What Magnus is putting pressure on a5 and e5. The rook is coming into the game, stopping Denis from playing knight c6. Slight advantage to Magnus still. Black has to solve some problems. Bishop takes, e4 is unplayable because of rook c8 check. So black played knight a6. Once again, Denis is threatening that pawn on e4. What's Magnus going to do about it? And the position is about equal. Both sides have weak pawns. Pawn structure symmetrical. Very well played game so far, Yovi.
Yeah, Magnus doing Magnus things, and if he actually turns the screw and wins this one, Denis Lazavik is going to be in huge trouble, and Magnus is going to be on the brink of retaining his EWC title. He improves the rook, and now Denis has to find a way to maneuver his pieces. His bishop is locked in on the right, his other bishop on the left doesn't have a purpose, and white is primed and ready to jump in. This is actually really complicated, really difficult to untangle for Denis.
Yeah, the a5 pawn is weak. If Magnus can win that pawn and have a pass b pawn, he'll be well on his way to victory. Denis putting pressure on e4. Magnus defending and attacking, defending the e4 pawn, defending the bishop on a4, and attacking the a5 pawn. So far, this is really Magnus territory, this kind of position. The bishop on g7 is still blocked. Black is still doing okay, but the onus is on Lazavik to defend properly and equalize the position, which was not his intention when he played the King's Indian. He was hoping for double edge attacking play, and the way Magnus played the opening took him out of that. Trading queens. I like to play this way with white, so my opponent doesn't get the attack they like and not get the position they like. Even if the engine says you don't get an advantage, you get the type of position that you like more than your opponent, which is important in 2700, 2800 level chess.
Right, and it's also anti-young person chess. There is no complications.
Are you saying old man chess? Is that what you're saying? Are you calling me an old man?
Well, this is perfect strategy. Look at that. You have killed any energy in the game for black. Black cannot get mobile. There's a problem with the pawn on a5. The bishop standing there on g7, the dark square bishop, isn't working. The other bishop isn't really doing anything either. If the black knight jumps into the game, then suddenly the rook is going to post up to its perfect row. So this is why actually we see some improvement of the dark square bishop, but this does allow white to win a pawn. And the first thing that I will be looking at, what happens if white grabs that pawn in the middle?
Yeah, Magnus can take either pawn. Taking on a5 looks dangerous because of knight c5. All of Magnus's bishops are attacked. But yeah, I think you're right. Knight takes e5 actually makes sense. Magnus is a pawn ahead. He does play knight takes e5. Black has compensation. Black plays knight c5. Lazavik attacks e4 and a4 and is putting pressure on... Whoa. That was what we call the drunken bishop. And Magnus saves his bishop on a4. Got to have the two bishops. Defending his pawn on e4, and will Lazavik continue to play the initiative with a4 or bishop a6? Or is Lazavik going to try to get his pawn back and play rook e8 and attack on the e line? He does play bishop a6. The rook doesn't have a lot of squares to go to. Black has an initiative for the pawn, but a pawn is a pawn, and once again, we have a Magnus type position, Yovi.
Yeah, we do have a Magnus type of position, but look at the way he is holding things together. He is an extra pawn up, but Magnus for now, Denis rather, for now does have the initiative. He's going to start to ask questions of the white knight. So now it's time for Magnus to go into solid mode and just make sure everything is knitted together. Make it all concrete. So I'm expecting the bishop to start improving. Maybe the knight can also, oh, it comes forward. Okay, keeping an eye of this b4 square, stopping the bishop from posting up there. What is Denis going to play? He chases that bishop, chases the knight down.
Yeah, also the knight on c6 was defending the d4 square, which was a nice square for Lazavik to go. Magnus seems not very pleased with himself. After knight c6, he started shaking his head. Doesn't like what's happening after bishop b5. Magnus is pretty passive, although I do like the fact that Magnus is up a pawn. So Black's position is okay. Black has some counterplay. Black's pieces are more active. White's very passive, just trying to keep his extra pawn. But Magnus doesn't seem to know what to do since his knight on c6 is virtually trapped.
Well, Black has some ideas, right? You can post the bishop up, attack the rook, and just try to open things up and target the white king. So that's why the white king just gets itself some air. Everything is okay. You can still start harassing the white rook as well. Post it up on the long diagonal. Get that center pawn to block. What else can Denis do? It's okay. He
As
goes
you
for
suggested.
That. He goes for that, but okay, what happens next? I'm expecting Magnus just to block the attack with a pawn, and you can even maybe give up some material.
One thing Magnus could do, because he likes to trade off the pieces, is play knight e7 check and rook c8 check and trade off the rooks. Magnus plays your move instead, e5, keeping in the extra pawn, although now the pawn is attacked.
Yeah, now perhaps there's some questions, because now the knight comes in, attacks both the rook and the bishop. Okay, Denis regaining his pawn, but we see Magnus, he just wants to go in business mode. Maybe he can just attack that bishop. Okay, instead he just moves that pawn forward. He's just going to argue, you know what, my pawn is going to be weak, but so is your pawn on the left. We'll call it even.
Yeah, this is going to be a draw. Magnus upset he couldn't get more with his extra pawn. But Magnus had the type of game that he likes. He just didn't get any advantage. So this will be a nice solid draw, which, I mean, if you're Magnus, you can't be unhappy. You won the first game.
Yeah.
So
a good choice of opening, I got to say, from Magnus, because it did look like for a while Denis was in huge trouble, but Denis just showing his class, navigating the danger. And this is also pretty dangerous. There's some tricks in town. Rook takes pawn. Watch out. There is a checkmate on the back rank. Okay.
No, Magnus saw it.
Of course. Of course, he sees it.
I think the players can't agree to a draw until move 40 unless they change that rule for the final. I'm not sure. That was the old rule.
Exactly. And now here, it's everything is completely equal. And we have our rook and pawn endgame that we have seen throughout the match. Players just repeating this game is going to finish in a draw. And Magnus leads 1.5 to half.
That was a fair result. Magnus shaking his head after the game, thinking he should have gotten more advantage with white. Pretty easy draw for Denis. He ended up having to sacrifice a pawn, but he wasn't in really any danger. Denis didn't get the type of checkmating attack that people want to get when they play the King's Indian, but he equalized, he drew with black. He has to win the next game with white. He's got to start winning some games. He hasn't won any games yet. If Magnus wins the next game, we've crowned a champion. Magnus will win EWC again. So Denis has to win or draw the next game. It's game 3. Magnus is up 1.5 half. Magnus is up 1-0. The next game is critical.
Absolutely. And Magnus in a very comfortable position. You know, not only is he leading this match by 1 point, but he's at choice now for what he's going to do against Denis's opening. He can play very solidly in the knowledge that if Denis goes all out for the attack, he can just withstand the pressure and get him on the counterattack.
A brilliant exchange sacrifice in game 2, or game 1, I should say, gave Magnus the win. So Magnus has the lead. He always has the lead. He hasn't lost a game. Things are going his way. And what's funny is, even when things are going Magnus's way, they're never going enough for his satisfaction. He's still shaking his head. He's the ultimate perfectionist. Even when he doesn't lose a game, he still wants to play better. That's a 2800 player for you, Yovi.
Exactly. And Magnus just reacting in a very versatile manner. You know, Denis really went for him in that first game, and he just found that rook takes bishop. That was the game of the match so far, and it completely changed the momentum. And from then on, Magnus just does not put a foot wrong. Denis completely helpless against the onslaught of pawns. And then when it came to this, look how he calculated it out. Everything under control, smooth performance in game 2. Denis tries to get some activity in the opening, and this is the moment. Magnus slams the door in his face. No activity whatsoever.
No, Magnus great, probably the best that ever lived at stopping counterplay, giving his opponent no winning chances, and basically it's just draw town and win town for Magnus. Draws half the games, wins half the games, keeps the momentum going. Denis can't get anything. Denis gets to change something up the next couple of games if he wants to stay in this match.
Yeah, and it's going to be always, how much risk should you take? How much should you be willing to gamble when everything could be decided in the next game? Magnus 1 point away from retaining his EWC title. And so far, he's gone through the whole event undefeated.
It looks like Denis needs Eminem as his coach. If he only has one shot, if he only had one chance, this is his one shot. This is the most money Denis has ever played for. This is his last chance. The next 2 games will decide whether Magnus retains his title or Denis can make a comeback and we can have a real match on our hands, Yovi.
Exactly, and there's so much on the line. You know, there's big money at stake. There's 1,000 points for his club on the line. So much meaning to this. It would be a chance to enter the history books, but you have to take it move by move, because in the way, Magnus Carlsen 1 point away from becoming champion.
Yeah, Magnus needs just 2.5 out of 4. He has 1.5. Any game could do it. Any victory does it. Looks like Denis is coming back into the stage after a short break. Will he be wanded again? Probably not after that performance. No need to wand when you never get a winning position. So Denis putting on the headset, doesn't want to hear us talk anymore. He has had enough of me. He's like, how do I get this Ben Final guy to stop commentating? And the answer is, put on the headset. Oh, he is getting wanded, so he must be playing good.
Well, he's playing really accurate chess. Just some some small mistakes here and there, some big moments. And Magnus gets ready and seated at his computer. Everything working superbly for the world number one. As we see him there with his key. Who will be putting their key into the trophy? That is a big question. At the minute, Magnus Carlsen 1 point away.
And the game's coming up shortly. Magnus going to have the black pieces again. Denis has to win to equalize this set, down 1.5-half. Hasn't won a game this match. Going to want to change that. He's beaten so many strong players before. Didn't want to play Magnus, but it's the finals. When it's the grand final, you're going to get paired with Magnus. That's the way it goes. You just have to defeat him. Nobody's defeated Magnus before. Not this year, not last year. There's always a first time for everything. Can Denis get it done this game and win with the white pieces?
Well, we'll find out what a competition Denis has had. Defeating Sina Moverhead, Jan Nepomniachtchi, Nordebek Abdusatorov, Hikaru Nakamura, and now Magnus Carlsen. What a final it has been. Magnus, again, just showing us he is such a versatile player. Yesterday in the quarterfinals, he came out swinging against Nihal Sarin. Now he's going for a completely different approach. He keeps saying to Denis, you cannot out-Magnus me. I am the boss. I am the best. So Denis, he needs to do something. He's got the white pieces for what could be the final time. And we will see what approach will he take.
Do you think Denis is going to go all out and sacrifice and play crazy, or a nice, solid, get a slight advantage and try to outplay Magnus? What do you think, Yovi?
I think he has to do a combination. Again, it's easier said than done. As we see Denis open up with the king's pawn. What will Magnus play? Well, he tries to do the same. We're seeing a Lopez, Roy Lopez. This opening has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And what will Magnus do? Will he try to shut the door on any activity and go for a Berlin, which is developing the knight? No, he actually chases away the bishop. And we're going to see a really tense maneuvering games, and Magnus knows this type of position so well.
Yeah, Magnus could have white or black in this position, as a lot of super GMs have over the decades. It's a close Sicilian. It's a slow maneuvering game, which obviously is like for both players. White played A4, putting some pressure on the queen side. It's going to be a really long maneuvering game, and the only way that's going to change is if somebody moves the D pawn up 2 squares. Either white plays D4 or black plays D5 early in the game, which I don't suspect is going to happen. Instead, A4, H3, play on the side. White has the open A file for his rook. White's preventing bishop G4. White's going to maneuver the knight over to G3 or play knight D5 and then play C3, and very slow maneuvering game. Magnus is like, I know this position. What am I supposed to do? Bishop E3, and he's taking the slow, steady approach, is Denis. He's not taking the sacrificial, crazy approach, which some people take when they're in a must-win situation.
Yeah, there's no romantic chess here. This is pure technique. And Magnus has a choice. He can just play really naturally, move the rook 1 square, drop the dark squared bishop back, and try to get in the break that Ben was mentioning, burst open the center. Or he can just play with a light square bishop, come out 2 squares, challenge its counterpart, and then just take the game from there. Because white has a lot of options, jumping in the knight, trading off the bishops. And that's a very flexible approach. So what will Magnus do?
Yeah, Magnus has probably had white in these positions also, and the Ruy Lopez, so he has a lot of confidence. He can play either side and get a reasonable position. Magnus doesn't have to win this game. He'll be reasonably happy with the draw. He plays bishop E6, having the bishops attack each other on the diagonal. White can either trade bishops or sink the knight into D5. He ends up trading the bishops, doubling black's pawns. but giving black more control over the d5 square. Once again, is somebody going to play d5 or d4? That'll make the game a little bit more interesting. Or are they going to slowly maneuver around and not do very much? And he decided the maneuvering idea, knight e2, the knight can go to g3, white can play c3, d4, and is Magnus going to play in the center with d5, or is Magnus going to start maneuvering around just like Denis does?
Well, we see Magnus in maneuvering mode as he starts to initiate those trades. He says, I'm very happy with drawing this game. I'm very happy with moving that one step closer towards the crown. And now here, Denis, he cannot trade off rooks. He cannot concede the A line. So instead, what he should do is, again, make this little move and set up his own slide tricks, because there are 2 pawn weaknesses and Magnus is in full liquidation mode. He's like, swap it off. I want everything off the board. I want that draw.
I guess that's why he plays for Team Liquid, because he's in liquidation mode. Queen c1. White's going to sacrifice on h6, and the crowd's going to go crazy. No, the crowd would go crazy. Magnus played knight d8. He wants the knight to go to f7. He wants to play c5. White played knight g3. They were just having fun on the A file. Now they're playing on the king side, Yovi. That's more interesting for the spectator. Let's see some attack on the king side. Again, is white going to play d4? Is black going to play d5? Or are they just going to slowly maneuver around and see what they can come up with? Looks like Magnus is pretty much equalized so far.
I was going to say, I think we know the answer to that one. They're going to maneuver around for a lot of moves. And I'm going to say, actually, that this type of position is super deceptive. And it's deceptive because it looks like both players are doing absolutely nothing. Everything is even, everything is level. And then suddenly one person makes a move like that and you're like, oh, hang on a second. It's all about the space and who controls how many squares. And Magnus is saying, I want all the space for myself. And if you allow me, and if you don't get going on the right side of the board or the left side of the board, I'm going to start taking over and just put the pressure on.
Yeah, I'm not sure what white should do in this position. It seems like the pawn breaks that white has don't really accomplish very much. But you can't give Magnus all the space. Magnus has 3 pawns on the 4th row. His opponent only has 1. Magnus has more space on the queen side. Magnus really understands the ins and outs of the position. The time situation is about the same. Both players have to be relatively happy with the position. And it's going to be a slow maneuvering game until somebody breaks open in the center. White plays queen b1, which indicates to me he wants to play d4, and his queen is defending his pawn on e4 again, which Magnus has pressure on. Magnus with the queen on a8 and the knight on f6. Exactly. So is white going to play d4 and try to mess up Magnus's pawns? We're going to find out in the next couple of moves.
Exactly, and queen moving to that square is actually quite sophisticated. I mean, it had deep ideas. It was planning against any breakthrough on the light squares from Magnus. It's also setting up ideas in turn of perhaps advancing the B pawn 2 squares forward just to explode things open on the left side of the board. And as Ben has been mentioning, also breaking through in the center. So everyone, this is your slow maneuvering game, but as soon as there is a breakout, this position is going to heat up. Now here, queen moves off the open line. So now I would be so tempted either to break with the d-pawn in the center, just initiate action, and we have it. I can't believe I'm getting super excited about a pawn break, but I am. And look at this. We have some action on the board. How is Magnus going to deal with this one? He has some options. He can make some trades, or he can hold the tension and move a piece, just improve a piece, maybe move the rook to the open line.
That's right. Magnus has many options here. He can ignore white and just improve his position slowly, or he can have some captures in the center. Magnus not sure what to do. It looks like all roads lead to equality or maybe a slight advantage to white, but Magnus isn't sure what the easiest way to get a normal position is, and what white's next move is going to be. Is white going to continue in the center by playing something like rook d1, or is white going to trade on e5 and mess up black's pawn structure? It's not clear what white's going to do. It's not clear what black's going to do. Typically in these positions in classical chess, this is where the players take a lot of time and try to figure out their maneuvers. We don't have that luxury in 10-minute chess. You got to play by the seat of your pants, figure out what your opponent wants to do, and make really quick decisions. So far this match, Magnus has had the advantage on the clock, not this game. Magnus is behind on the clock. He's a little unsure of himself, and he plays the move c4, which surprises me, but it gives black more space on the queen side, Yovi.
Exactly, and it's now again decision time. Notice how Denis keeps the tension. He doesn't rush with doubling the black pawns. It just improves the queen. Maybe you're still going to be seeing another breakout on the left side of the board. Maybe we're going to be seeing something else. But it's such a difficult position for both sides to play because all of the tension is happening beneath the surface.
Yeah, the pawns in the center can all be captured. They're all defended. Both sides are sort of passively defending their pawns instead of playing with hyper-aggression. I like rook d1 because I think the rook's better on the d file than the e file. The rook on the e file was just babysitting the e4 pawn, which is already being defended by two of Denis's pieces. So the question is, can white ever play d5, maybe even sack a pawn to get that knight to f5? Black plays bishop f8. The bishop's safer on f8, defends the king side some more, gets out of the way of the queen, and Magnus is just happy playing the waiting game. Here comes knight h4. The knight wants to come to g6. Very interesting play by Lazavik. Maybe Denis wants to play f4 at some point.
Oh.
And Magnus quickly plays b4, not liked by the engine. That changes the position a lot and really weakens black's c4 pawn.
Exactly. Like the first move that you calculate here is the move that is now possible as a result of the black's last move. So the first move you need to be calculated is pawn takes pawn. What are the consequences of that? And then, still there's the possibility of jumping in with the knight, trying to get the bishop pair. And we also have a lot of pawn captures on the board. So Denis now thinking, and I would be tempted to capture the pawn and then jump in with the knight and maximize that pressure in the middle.
Magnus playing super aggressively on the queen side, not content with the drawn position of just playing boring and trying to equalize. Magnus trying to play for the advantage. The engine doesn't like it, and now we see a trade in the center. Typically, when the opponent plays on the flank, we want to counterattack in the center. And now Magnus has a difficult question. You take with the knight, and the knight can try to hop into d3 later, or take with the pawn and keep those double pawns controlling all the center squares. Magnus a little bit unsure of himself. First time in the match, maybe even the tournament, that Magnus has a real time disadvantage, unsure what to do, how to proceed. And looks like Denis is doing well this game as far as getting a double-edged position where all three results are possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure he was entirely happy with that capture. I was actually expecting knight takes pawn, so the knight jumps in, and this was something that was really attractive, especially because of Denis's last move, going in with the knight this direction. Remember, this position is now half open. If he manages to get knight takes bishop, the bishop is probably going to be better than the knight, and decision time for Denis. What does he want to do? He can take with the queen if it doesn't fall foul of any tricks happening, or he can take with the pawn. Because you're in a must-win situation, I feel like you just need to go all in.
Yeah, queen takes c3, knight takes e4 is very complicated. Taking with the b pawn is simpler, but as you said, a must-win situation.
Exactly.
Sometimes you got to play the more complicated
and he
line.
does it.
And he does.
He does make the more complex choice. And now there's going to be problems for Magnus. First up, he has to calculate, can he grab that pawn? I think that Magnus didn't realize that this move was possible. Knight takes pawn is going to be met by knight takes knight. And once the queen comes in, then there's going to be some simplifications. But the argument is that black pawn structure
is terrible.
Yeah. Not very impressive at all.
And also, Magnus has to calculate what happens on queen takes c4 with the e6 pawn hanging as well. Then the b2 pawn is hanging. A lot of calculation now. Magnus doesn't seem very happy about the situation. Magnus taking more time than he's taken this whole tournament. Big time disadvantage for Magnus. Heart rate going up more than usual. Usually Magnus is a cool customer, but heart rate getting close to 3 digits.
3 digits, yes. And the clock is ticking down under 3 minutes for Magnus Carlsen as he works out what is the best move. I mean, objectively, black is fine, but there's a lot of psychology at play in this position.
Yeah, it seems like things haven't gone exactly the way Magnus was hoping with his body language. Seems like Magnus gives away whether he's upset or not during the match. And he does take on e4. Will white take on e4? Will white play queen takes c4? Magnus had to calculate both. Denis is calculating now, trying to figure out which move gives them the best chance for an advantage. Engine says white is a tiny bit better, that Magnus is about equal. Magnus has a minute and a half less on the clock. So all 3 results are still possible. Very interesting position. This is Denis's chance, Yovi, to tie up the match.
Yeah. But okay, it's still going to be super difficult. But the very human move I'm going to say is actually to play queen takes pawn. You know, not all of us likes to sacrifice, and he does it. And he does it. And now Magnus is going to grab another pawn. And so Magnus is technically a pawn up for the time being, but you can just simply go knight takes bishop, and the pawn on e6 is going to fall. And again, we have a situation where we have hardly any pawns left. But the queen
on the same side, too.
Exactly.
Yeah, the engine says it's about equal. There's tremendous pressure on the players. One mistake takes an equal position and makes it a lost position. And with so little time on the clock, it's easy to blunder. So you got to be really calm and cool and collected, and keep the tension, not make any big blunders, and keep the draw in hand. And both players, just looking at their faces, look pretty calm to me.
Yeah. And this looks like it's a killer blow. It's attacking the rook, the bishop. However, it is possible to drop, or maybe not possible to drop the queen back. If you drop the queen back, the rook is going to line up on a2, and that checkmate threat is not going to be defensible. So this is the only move to stay in the game. You have to go on your own counterattack. Oh, and things are getting sharp as
very complicated, Yovi,
surround the black king. Now, how is black going to defend this one? First up, can you go on their counterattack? And that's exactly what Magnus does. He threatens a checkmate on g2 on his own, and this is going to force Denis to swap off the queens, and now we have black playing this endgame a pawn down.
It's a pawn down, but it's a doubled pawn. All the pawns are on the same side. The engine doesn't think that white has any winning chances because the bishop is really strong on f6. It's hard for white to create a passed pawn. The time situation is about the same. So the engine thinks it's a draw. Obviously, white is the one pressing with the extra doubled pawn, but black is very solid. White doesn't have any passed pawns. Usually, when all the pawns are on the same side, the game just ends in a draw. Magnus putting pressure on the g3 pawn, on the h2 king. Not easy for white to make progress.
No, not easy for Denis to make progress, but at least he's a pawn up. And usually when they get to this type of situations, everything is completely level. But now Magnus just improving his king. The problem is that knight, it doesn't have a good circuit. Like if it were anchored on the square that the rook is on, then maybe you could start to press a teeny tiny little bit. But
Magnus seems like the one pressing, moving his pieces forward, moving his pawns forward.
Yes. I mean, bishops are so good in these type of positions. You know, they're open. You can just drop back with the bishop, ask questions. And Magnus going for your move, which was just to press on the right side of the board.
Yeah, the extra double pawn doesn't harbor any winning chances for white. Magnus, all the endings are drawn. The rook and pawn ending, the rook and bishop ending. I don't even think Magnus thinks he's worse here. Got the better king, the better rook, the better minor piece. White's extra double pawn just has no chance of creating a passed pawn.
Exactly, they're so far back as well. They're not going to advance, and it's going to be almost impossible to create a passed pawn. And Magnus just doing everything by the book. Look how he puts his bishop in the center, in the middle of the board. The rook cuts off the white king, and the white knight is completely dominated.
Yeah, the bishop is just better than the knight in the open position. White king is stuck on the back rank. And if worse comes to worse, things could get bad for Denis in this position, because Denis has less than a minute on his clock.
That's true. He has less than a minute, and there is a choice on the board. And here,
okay, and Denis just bails out.
Yes. And now everything is completely level, and we have the eternal question. Who is better, the bishop or the knight? And the answer is neither, as we have another draw. Wow,
Pretty
Magnus
well-played game.
moving ever closer to retaining the championship crown. And very well-played game there from the pair.
Yeah, nobody was winning that game. It was always close to equal. Denis tried really hard. Good defense by Magnus, this Rui Lopez. And all Magnus needs now is a draw in the final game. Magnus has white, and he'll repeat as EWC champion of chess.
Yeah. And the thing is, Magnus with the white pieces knows how to shut down the game. You know, he's going to open up with a king's pawn. And if there's going to be a Sicilian, it's going to be an Alpine Sicilian.
Yep.
It's going to go for those positions that are very well known. And Magnus just showing us how world-class he is.
Yeah, when he's slightly worse, he draws easily. When he's slightly better, presses for the win. When he has less time, he plays faster than his opponent until he has more time. And he's never really in trouble. Even when I think he's in trouble, he easily bails out. He hasn't lost a game this event. And the only way he won't repeat as champion is if he loses this game with white, which seems really unlikely. A difficult task for Lazavik. He's got to try to win with black, and then win in the playoff. But it's going to be a tough task at hand. You can see he's thinking about, what openings do I play? How do I get winning chances with black?
How to get winning chances as black against Magnus, who knows his openings inside out. Now, traditionally, I think we'll probably see some kind of non-conflict approach in the center at the beginning. I don't think that Denis will be wanting that. You don't want to be going into reams of theory. You want to take the game far away from the theory book as possible, because this is Denis's last chance to stay in the match. He needs to win to force the set to Armageddon.
If he wins the game, we'll call him Denis Lashchancevich. Go, Denis. You can do it. You can beat Magnus. Everybody does it. Or wait a minute. Maybe my commentary is mistaken on that point.
Absolutely. Magnus with the white pieces on the cusp of winning his second EWC Championship title. I mean, 2 events, and he's just breezed through them like a king.
Yeah. Didn't play his best, I think, the first day of this event, but I think he got a little bit better every day, played himself into form, and never looked like he was in any trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, completely
Yeah, you were right,
troubled.
Yovi, E4.
Yeah, and now it's decision time, right? If you go E4, E5, if you try to do the symmetrical approach, Magnus knows how to handle that. And it's a Caracal.
It's the Yovi variation.
It's light square strategy in action. Now, there are ways to shut the game down against this particular opening. I mean, it's a solid approach from white, but this is one of them. Oh, okay.
Yeah, the panel, that's what I play with white.
Yeah, well, this is not one way to shut the game down. I was expecting some bishop developing, the exchange variation, but instead we have a pan off. And what is he going to go for? Yeah, okay, nice move there from Denis. Again, this is a line that hasn't been so well known, so...
Yeah, I play both sides of the Caracal also, and I play this with black, and I've never played A6.
Yes.
I play the bishop G4 line.
Exactly, but the bishop G4 line would have involved a long rook and pawn.
Difficult to win.
Very difficult to
Yeah.
win. But as it stands here now, okay, plenty of moves. You can bolster that knight with a pawn, but it's way more common to do this move, and you're setting up a trap of knight takes knight. So you
Magnus will
have to-
never see it.
Well, you have to do something about that, and the most popular move is to drop the bishop back and maintain that pin, and... Oh... Knight takes knight. What is going to be happening after knight takes knight? Now, knight takes bishop, bishop takes, and...
It's the queen sacrifice.
Okay, and the king has to go running to avoid the perpetual check. And now this is so dangerous. Magnus knows his stuff. And now the black king is going to have to hide in the corner. And if Magnus doesn't find
It's only
the right
a piece
moves.
for a queen, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
But okay, there's a lot of play for the piece for the time being. But if this does not work out, then Denis is going to be up big material.
Wow.
But the main move for black here is to go tuck your king into the corner. It is also possible to move your queen to the right.
Have you had black in this position, Yovi?
I've never touched this one.
Have you played A6?
No, I've never.
Oh, you haven't played A6.
No,
You've
no.
analyzed it, but decided not to play it.
I've seen it in action. Most people chicken out. Most people do not want to go into this position as black because it feels very scary.
Yeah, it feels like there's sometimes white has perpetual with D5, bishop E3 check, bishop F4 check. And we can't have a perpetual if we're black because we have to win the game. It's a must-win game.
It is a must-win game, and he does go running with the king to safety, and now white should be just lengthening the dark squares, advancing the d-pawn, and kicking the knight away. You need to keep on playing with momentum here, because if Magnus puts 1 foot wrong, that's it. He's busted.
Black's position looks terrible except for one thing. Black's up a queen. Otherwise, I like everything about white's position.
I mean, there is that factor, but you know, if he manages to get the draw, because a draw is all he needs, he will have done it in style.
Yeah. Sacrificing his queen, going into the sharp variation. Both players seem like they're out of their preparation now, so we're going to see a fighting game where black's trying to get his king safe and get the bishop and rook developed on the king side.
Yeah, and two main moves in this position. You can jump forward with the knight, or you can give a check with a queen. Those are the moves that have been played. But you can see that this is scary stuff for black. You know.
No, in a blitz game, I'm definitely taking white. Probably in a slow game, I would take black. But yeah, of course, the engine says it's about equal.
Yep. But the engine is actually only saying that it's equal if you come out with the queen to give a check.
Queen A5 check is the best move.
That is the best move. If you move the knight, white is much better, believe it or not.
I believe it.
Yeah. And the whole point is that black's pieces are all fast asleep. So white actually has the time to get the king castle, jump in with the knight, attack the queen, attack the rook, and really start putting the pressure on the black king. And it's really difficult for black to untangle without having to give up material.
Very unusual opening. I'm really glad I haven't seen it before. I'm glad the players decided to play it. Give the crowd something to root for. A queen sacrifice. That's what we haven't seen this match.
Exactly. And we can show why this position is so dangerous for black. Because at the whole point, the queen comes out. This is the best move. And you need to maintain the initiative here. The initiative is so important for white. So you have to make this move. And now the knight must block anything else. And that's it. You are busted. And the knight does block. And now here, white can just simply castle. And again, just to highlight, the reason why this position is so dangerous for the black pieces is take a look at all of the starting pieces. The rooks, they are back in their original squares and they're not going to get out. It's a dangerous path for Denis to tread. It's a gamble going into this variation. And for Magnus, he's trying to get his crown in style.
I think Magnus knows what he's doing. He played castles relatively quickly.
Yeah, he definitely knows what he's doing. I mean, how scary is this? You think you've surprised your opponent, and he's just whizzing out all of these moves on theory. Okay, so I'm expecting black to start untangling, you know, start moving the bishop, get the rooks into the game. But also there could be a question, like how are you going to handle like the pushback that's going to be starting? Because black's queen and knight, they're on the same diagonal. So you can just attack with your A-pawn.
A3.
And suddenly there's going to be two pieces for the queen.
Yeah, the black king seems like it's never safe. And white has that dominating position with the bishops in the center. Not only is white dominating the position, except for the queen minus, but white's dominating on the clock. Magnus has 3 extra minutes. So unusual variation from Denis, but maybe he doesn't know it as well as Magnus does.
No. Well, it looks like Denis just trying to work things out, but he really does have to tread with care here. He takes the right move. He decides to try to get some development, and the move that I suggested has been played. Questions are being asked of the knight, and that knight cannot deliver.
If black wins this game, Yovi, there's another variation you can play in the Karo-Kan with black. You can start running your king away, taking queen sacrifices.
No.
You can do it.
No. This one is just too hot to handle. No, don't try this one at home at all. And now bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight. They're both a possibility, but white is soon going to start to recover the lost material.
Yeah, 2 pieces and a pawn for the queen. If white can somehow win the E pawn, white gets a past D pawn, then white's material disadvantage isn't so bad. White's king is safer. Black doesn't have a lot of targets. So very interesting position. Queen sacrifice, the engine says it's about equal. It likes the way the players are playing so far. Unfortunately for Denis, as we saw in previous games, Denis has a big time disadvantage. He's going to have to speed up. He can't get in a situation where he has 1 minute and Magnus has 3, and it's complicated. That's going to spell disaster.
Yeah. And for Magnus, though, it's such a gutsy move going into this variation, knowing that, yes, it is a sound, but it's very difficult to play when you sacrifice the queen. But now he does have good choices. He can go bishop takes knight. He can take with the pawn. And again, he can, just start harassing.
I like taking with the bishop because it sort of keeps your bishop on f8. I like taking with the pawn because then I can play bishop e3 check and start harassing the king. So I like them both. But yeah, now if black plays bishop g7 and white plays bishop takes e7, not sure black's up material anymore. White's got that passed pawn. White has a bishop and 2 pawns for a queen. It's getting close.
It's getting close, and he plays the best move. This is the best way to unfurl because you have to get developed. And bishop takes pawn. I'm expecting black to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to grab everything I can. You might as well.
And I misspoke earlier. I said a bishop and 2 pawns. I meant a bishop, a knight, and 2 pawns. Bishop, knight, and 2 pawns for a queen is almost equal. The pawn on d5 is very active, going to d6, d7. White's bishops are very active. Black's king is still a little funny. Black's rook on a8 doesn't have a great square to go to. I'd rather have white in this position.
Well, I always like playing with the queen. So Magnus playing a bit of an unusual move. I was expecting the bishop to go all the way back just so that you could advance the d pawn when push comes to shove. But now, what is Denis going to do? Okay, he can't really mobilize any of his pieces, so I'm expecting him to take the pawn, but maybe he can. Maybe he can just throw in his rook to attack the bishop just for good measure.
Yeah, I think if the rook goes to d8, then Magnus will play bishop c7 and then try to get the d pawn going. I think that's why Magnus played bishop d6. h6 was play kicking the knight away. That seems like a good idea. Knight on g5 seemed pretty active.
Yeah.
Magnus can go to e4 or f3. They both seem good. The knight has some good squares. And he does a third choice, which I didn't expect, knight f7, putting his knight further into Denis's position. Again, it's a really interesting queen sack. The engine says it's about equal, but it's the kind of equal where somebody wins, not the kind of equal where it's a boring draw.
This is far from a boring draw. There's so much excitement here. And most of it coming from Magnus, I got to say, because this is a really unpleasant task for Denis. How to handle this one. We have the whole point of white's play, which is simply to step aside with the dark squared bishop and start advancing the d pawn. That is a very simple idea, and it's really effective. Magnus.
Yeah, I used to like being a queen ahead. Now I'm not so sure.
It's not easy to play when you're up material. And there we see Denis wants clarification, but this
engine
is
doesn't like
the
that
wrong move. And now here, Magnus can just simply grab the rook. And Denis relying on this just to clarify things. But what is the answer?
Yeah, Denis wants to take that e-pawn, and then he wants to play rook e8 if Magnus plays rook e1. Magnus trying to find a way to keep his e-pawn on the board. And this is interesting. The engine wants to play b4 to play bishop c5 check and start an attack on black's king. That's very non-obvious for me because I'm trying to hang on to my e-pawn and get my pawn promoted, and the engine's trying to checkmate black with b4, bishop c5 check. b4 seems like a really tough move for a human to find.
If he plays that move, if he moves the action to the left, I will personally raise my hat up and I will salute Magnus. What a move if he finds it. I gotta say, it's still super complicated here. You mean advancing the e-pawn is gonna cost the knight. That requires some calculation. And it's not really that easy to do or make any progress. I mean, the most natural move is to get your rook behind the passed pawn. But like you say, black is gonna start also harassing that pawn.
It's funny, white can play e7 here, and after queen takes f7, we have bishop c5 check, and the rook's coming into d7 or d8, and white's actually winning in this position.
He finds it, Ben. He finds the right
b4.
move.
That was the best move.
That was the best move. I raise my hat. I salute the world number one, Magnus Carlsen. He finds the best move. And why is this so good? Because it looks like you can take the pawn, Ben.
Yeah, if black takes the pawn on e6, then white plays bishop c5 check, and black's king comes under fire. Material's about equal, but white has the initiative. Black's rook is bad, black's king is bad. Magnus is Magnus for a reason. He finds moves like b4, and now the engine says Magnus is winning with the attack, and the material situation is about level now.
Yeah.
The engine actually doesn't take the pawn on e6. It says bishop c5 check is too strong, but it says that Magnus is winning in any case. The attack on black's king is too good. Lazavik has 3 minutes less on the clock, something I was worried about a few minutes ago. Lazavik with 1.5 minutes on the clock. Magnus has 4.5 minutes. Magnus winning on the board. It looks like Magnus is going to have a clean sweep.
Beautiful. Beautiful play there from the world number one. Look at the way that Magnus courageously went for this one, sacrificing his queen, and Denis understanding that the bishop check would have been disastrous. Well, he decides to put his rook there, getting ready to sacrifice the piece in order to cling on. But Magnus now, he can just play simple chess. He can just move his rook behind the pawn, and it is all about the coordination. Just beautiful play here from Magnus Carlsen, entertaining us in style. I mean, what a showman. I mean, they saved the best.
A must-draw game, and he sacrifices his queen in the opening, outplays his opponent, and now it looks like he's well on his way to victory.
Yeah, on the cusp of winning. And that means that he will be the 2026 EWC champion, and throws in a check. And here it's going to be all about the e-pawn. Nothing to be done. And Magnus knows it. Magnus Carlsen is the winner. What a game. The king stays the king, and Magnus Carlsen is 2026 EWC chess champion.
Undefeated, 3-1, 3-1. Relatively easy from Magnus's perspective. A tough match. Denis put up a good fight, but in the end, he was no match for Magnus.
What a performance there from Magnus. He knew exactly what to do from start to finish, looking untroubled there. Hasn't dropped a single game, didn't lose anything. What a performance there from the world number one, winning the EWC back to back in impressive style.
Lazavik looks like a man who's about to have his key crushed. That's why Magnus does well at the EWC. He loves crushing keys. He loves sacrificing his queen. He loves sacrificing the exchange, and he loves never losing. That's Magnus for you.
And we were going to send it straight to the stage for the man himself.
hands over his key to our EWC back-to-back champion, Magnus Carlsen.
Undefeated, inevitable, this man simply cannot lose, and it is time for him to head to the crusher for the final key crush of the week, the one that establishes him as the back-to-back EWC champion. One last pop, Rob.
Not losing a single game along the way. This is a level of dominance that has rarely been seen, if ever, at the Esports World Cup.
Absolutely, and it is time now to cement his legacy as Denis Lazavik's key is about to give us a good old pop.
The last key of the event. Oh my goodness, and maybe the strongest pop of all, Damascus. The last one is down.
Absolutely, the last one is down, but Rob, of course, we have one more thing to do right now, which is to get the victor's key and go put it in the trophy. We are about to get the champion's key to proceed to the final ceremony. But of course, Denis Lazavik's key is absolutely destroyed and of a dream for Denis as we move forward towards the trophy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to get ready to go and lift that trophy. Magnus, if you would like to follow us on the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, history has been made right before your eyes as Magnus places his key into the trophy one more time. Not losing one single game. Put your hands together for our back-to-back champion, Magnus Carlsen!